within the VA Office of Resolution Management, Diversity, and Inclusion. The office that is has been charged with creating a VA free of harassment in all forms. Since last month's hearing, my staff has received further evidence as well as testimony from the brave whistleblowers, which have exposed this office for what it is, a broken organization that has been poisoned with the toxic culture of bad leaders. Over the last few weeks, majority and minority staff conducted over 10 hours of transcript interviews with whistleblowers. The whistleblowers are not testifying here today in order to protect their identities and because many of them still fear retaliation by VA leaders. This fear is so real that the reason why we just went into executive session was so that the members of this committee could hear a recording submitted by one of our brave whistleblowers. We did this in executive session for the first time in at least 17 years to protect the identity as they are fearful for their career. However, I'm going to share some of the other whistleblowers' words today so that American people can hear their stories. Now, please look at the quotes on the screen. Quote, "I've been in this field for years, and to see this happen to an organization that should be protecting people from it. They don't adhere to the law. It's a sexual, promiscuous environment. Things are allowed that aren't even allowed at other organizations, but it's allowed here," end quote. As you can see, this is an organization that has completely lost trust of over 300,000 VA employees they are supposed to protect. 2 weeks ago, VA sent the committee the result of their internal Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection investigation. I will start by saying that I appreciate VA sharing this report and additional documents with the committee. I'm also pleased that Mr. Guy from the VA OAWP office is here today to speak about the report. The findings of the report are damning, disturbing, and frankly despicable. The report confirms much of what the whistleblowers shared with us, that VA ORMDI office is full of misconduct to the highest degree. This is unacceptable, but honestly, not surprising given the committee has continued to uncover. For months, these whistleblowers have told the committee how their leaders have failed them. I quote, "I sent in a complaint against Mr. Archie Davis to the secretary. I felt that if I didn't go to the very top, that with Harvey and Archie being in the position of power, I felt like it wasn't going to go anywhere. I felt like my voice wasn't going to be heard," end quote. I ask you to read what the whistleblower told the committee and try to put yourself in their shoes. The whistleblower reached out to the secretary himself because they felt like their voice was not being heard. This tragic story gets worse. The secretary is going to tell us in a few minutes that he does not recall the email, but he acknowledges that he forwarded it to VA lawyers, also somehow remembered to send it to the U.S. Postal Service, who reviewed allegations of harassment on ORMDI. It strains reasonableness that he remembered to send the email to one entity outside of the organization, but failed to remember the contents of the email, which was included many of the graphic text messages members of this committee have already seen. And he is going to say that he does not recall seeing the letter I sent him on September 29th. This whistleblower filed the complaint. That wasn't enough. Had a chairman's letter written on their behalf. That wasn't enough. And contacted the secretary himself. That wasn't enough. But Mr. Secretary, the buck stops with you, right? I hope in your testimony you will explain why a chairman's letter and a whistleblower's contact to you directly wasn't enough to get your attention. Throughout the investigation, the whistleblowers have also told me about hostile and toxic work environments they experienced at VA's ORMDI office. I quote, Archie would always tell me a person never wants to get on his bad side, because once you get on his bad side, you'll feel the wrath. Members, imagine how powerless it must feel to be treated like that and then be ignored when you speak up. Some of you know exactly how this feels. The whistleblowers have told us about the harassment they experienced and their fear of retaliation. One whistleblower commented how, and I quote, "Archie would always try to persuade me with money. Archie even asked me one time, 'What is wrong with you? I'm trying to offer to buy you this, that, and the other. I'm trying to offer to fly you to DC, and you just keep saying no. Any other woman would have taken me up on it. What's wrong with you?' I would state to him, 'There's nothing wrong with me.'" How broken and dysfunctional does an organization need to be to allow a senior supervisor to continue this behavior? The internal VA investigation report confirmed most of the major allegations against senior VA OR-MDI leaders that I personally had informed Secretary McDonald about in my letter in September. These include employees engaging in and inappropriate personal relationships with subordinate employees, engaging in inappropriate conduct of a sexual nature, failing to initiate an investigation into sexual harassment allegations, failing to take prompt and appropriate action when notified of allegations that a chief of staff was harassing and potentially threatening employees. Frankly, I would be stunned if anyone who had seen the evidence and listened to these whistleblowers thought differently, but apparently they did. We all remember the text messages that were provided to this committee and how disgusting and graphic they were. Later, you see how VAHR's top brass, Ms. Gina Grasso, dismissed them. The OAWP report also made several recommendations on how VA should address this misconduct. The jury's still out on whether this administration and the VA will follow these recommendations with action. I want the witnesses to listen carefully when I say this. I'll be paying close attention to what VA does with these recommendations, and even more closely to how long it takes this administration to act. Now, unfortunately, I think we all see how broken civil service system deters good employees from reporting misconduct and delays justice for those who committed it. If the average American did half of these inappropriate actions outlined in this report, they would face severe consequences at 99% of businesses around this country. I also doubt that, unlike the accused, fewer Americans would be allowed to continue to collect high six-figure taxpayer-funded salaries while their case was reviewed by an endless appeals system. Even fewer would then be allowed to retire with a hefty pension, but they will. It's troubling that VA did not start the investigation, the most serious sexual harassment allegations, until 45 days after I personally informed the Secretary. And it is unexcusable for the department to delay addressing the broken and toxic situation within OR-MDI any longer. On September 29th, I informed Secretary McDonald about the allegations against Mr. Harvey Johnson, Mr. Archie Davis, and Mr. Gary Richardson. Former VHAR Assistant Secretary Gina Grasso refused to testify today, announced her resignation November 14th. This was the day after I called the Secretary, and the VA suddenly decided it was a good idea to look into this and reassign the accused. Ms. Grasso oversaw Mr. Johnson and the ORMDI office for over 2 years. 4 days after her resignation was official, VA wrote to me that Ms. Grasso had known about these allegations since October 2nd. Once Ms. Grasso was out the door, VA was happy to tell us when she knew about the allegations. No subpoena required. In their report, OAWP quoted her explanation as to why it took so long for her to do anything. And I quote, "There were so many complaints at once, and it took time to figure out who was the grieved. And it's several things on the plate. I don't think I have any other great explanation, honestly. Simply having other things to do is not an acceptable reason for delaying acting on this issue. To me, it's just lazy." Additionally, Ms. Grasso made the following comment about the harassing text message sent by Mr. Davis in her testimony to OAWP. And I quote, "The employee was feeling harassed, but she was continuing to text him. So that's kind of weird, but it doesn't mean it's okay. I'm not saying that at all." End quote. Clearly, Ms. Grasso did not take the referenced whistleblower's concerns seriously. Since the whistleblowers are not here to respond for themselves, here's what one of the whistleblowers told committee staff about how they dealt with Mr. Davis's harassment. And I quote, the answer was, "You know, I handled Archie differently than I would anyone else with a hard no. You know, anyone else, I wouldn't care how they took it, how they felt. That was my soft no to let him down easy in my mind." And the question was, okay. And then the answer in my mind, question, "Sorry, I was just going to say, you wanted to use a soft no because, again, you were afraid of what would happen if you were more forceful, right?" The answer, absolutely. The whistleblower was afraid and felt trapped. When further explaining what it was like being subject to workplace harassment, one whistleblower made the following comment, and I quote, "I was fearful to cross him, fearful of retaliation at this point. Okay, he's the chief of staff. He is in a position of power. Who is going to believe me?" The whistleblower's words say it all. The whistleblower was afraid and felt trapped. Yet Ms. Grasso and every senior leader was aware of these allegations, did nothing. They turned their backs. They failed to act. I repeat my previous comments that as a father of daughters, this blatant dereliction of duty makes me sick. Further, VA has so far failed to fully comply with the subpoenas this committee approved by a vote of 22-1. Until VA stops defying congressional authority, we won't know exactly which senior leaders knew about these allegations, when they knew it, and why they failed to act. I want you all to read this quote from one of the whistleblowers. Quote, "HR and A took a blind eye. They turned their head because of these relationships that they had with each other. Things were allowed to be done that shouldn't have been done. They all knew each other, either in the military, the Army, the Pentagon. Gina Grasso, Mr. Mayo, and Harvey Johnson all worked together in the Pentagon. So they had this friendship, this alliance. So even if you complain, they weren't going to do anything." End quote. This is the environment that drove this whistleblower to this committee for help. This is the environment that our veterans are being served by. The very office that is supposed to stop sexual harassment was full of sexual harassment. Now, I want you to read one final quote from one of the whistleblowers. Quote, "I never thought that all these years, even in the military, I've seen a lot. I've never been in this situation myself. It's always things happening to other people. I never thought I'd be in the hot seat." End quote. Every level of the VA failed these whistleblowers. As long as I'm chairman, This committee will not fail them. Let me say that again. We will not fail them. I am disappointed that Ms. Grasso and Mr. Johnson have failed to testify today and provide their side of the story. I'm disappointed that the VA yet again submitted their judgment over mine and did not send all the witnesses I invited to appear today. This administration can ignore these whistleblowers, partially ignore our subpoenas, send people here to testify who just got on the job less than 4 weeks ago and try to hide and protect those who knew what happened. But we will find the truth, no matter how long it takes. We are going to continue to demand answers from the department, pursue this investigation as far as it goes. Now, I appreciate the documents VA provided to the committee, but I fear there are too many questions that will remain unanswered after today's hearing. One of the documents that was provided to us did, however, expose some serious allegations that will be addressed. On the screen, you will see an email from Ms. Grasso to Secretary McDonough on October 29th, stating she was sorry for not meeting the appropriate standards and thanking him for allowing her to have a gracious departure from VA. I hope the Secretary can explain what she meant by that and why she was thanking him for her gracious departure. Emails over the next few days show that the Secretary is working to provide a soft landing for Ms. Grasso. He even offered to be very disciplined in how I talk about this and how other senior leaders talk about your service at VA. I hope the Secretary has a good explanation of why Ms. Grasso announced her resignation the day after I called him about these accusations. But I imagine he'll be very disciplined. This type of behavior by senior leaders is a sharp contrast to the Secretary's annual statement to VA's workforce, where he has encouraged employees to come forward if they see or hear about harassment. Review this one from last year, where the Secretary stated that when sexual harassment is ignored, it can encourage such conduct to continue. This seems very appropriate for the situation he now appears to find himself in. Secretary McDonough is going to tell this committee that he has no independent recollection of these sexual harassment allegations until I raise them with him on November 13th. If that is true, it is a sorry excuse. Why did he not take action to protect these brave whistleblowers sooner? If he really does not remember learning about these allegations, then there is someone on his staff who does. And if they do, why are they still on the staff? Why does it appear that he was more interested in Ms. Grasso's future than the safety of the employees? Why did he and other VA officials only move the accused senior leader to different position pending investigation and didn't do that until the day after I made the allegations public? Why does the Secretary and the VA say they do not tolerate sexual harassment when the evidence we have says the opposite? To put it simply, Secretary McDonough owes this committee answers to the following basic questions. 1, what did he know? 2, when did he know it? And why on earth did he or anyone on senior leadership team not act sooner? It is good that the Secretary McDonough is here to answer these and other serious questions about his conduct. However, if the goal is to be transparent and build trust with this committee, we shouldn't have received his testimony late last night filed with the lawyer phrases like no independent recollection. The questions I have are not political in nature. Now, let me say that again. The questions I have are not political in nature. This doesn't have to do with politics. They are questions about one's judgment, moral, and their duty to do what's right even when no one's looking. That is what I mean, and that is what it means to be a leader. Nothing more, nothing less. That is the level of trust that veterans expect from us. I also have questions about when other senior leaders at VA knew about these allegations and why the entire chain of command did nothing to stop them. If the Secretary does not remember reading these allegations, I hope someone does. This is an important question outside of the Secretary's testimony, because well after he's gone, after I'm gone, after every one of you are gone, we must ensure that our legacy is that no one who tolerates sexual harassment or sexually harasses should be serving our veterans, period. I was planning on holding a business meeting after this hearing to consider a subpoena resolution. The resolution would require senior VA leaders, including the committee's ORMDI investigation, to appear for transcript interviews with the committee. In November and December, I wrote the Secretary to request these interviews. After stonewalling for a while, VA asked that I wait until their initial investigation was complete. I did. And I agreed because VA committed to two important things. First, to send me the results of the investigation, which we've got. And second, after I review the report, I could decide if I wanted to move forward with interviews. As I said before, serious questions still remain about when senior leaders knew about these allegations and what they did about them. So I repeated my request for transcribed interviews for a third time. Now, I appreciate the Secretary, through one of the lawyers, informed me yesterday afternoon that he would make VA officials available for interview with the committee. It is disappointing that it took multiple letters and months of waiting. Nevertheless, this is a positive step. However, Mr. Secretary, your staff has not specifically agreed to any of the interviews or individuals I have requested by name as of yet. Until you do so, I will still remain kind of skeptical here. The department does not get to pick and choose when they comply to Congress's oversight. Full stop. With that, I recognize Ranking Member Takano for his opening comments.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. I'm pleased that you joined us today to offer insight into how this investigation was handled at the highest level of VA and where VA will go from here under your leadership. Accountability starts and ends with you, and I look forward to working with you to ensure that VA is a welcoming, harassment-free environment for employees and veterans alike. It is unfortunate that my majority colleagues continue intentionally to mislead the public on the allegations and findings of this investigation. The inherent tension of sensitive and personal circumstances such as these is that people tend to look at the situation from their own perspective, from their own corner, and can only see what is in their view. The Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection has a responsibility to look at the full scope of evidence and to provide objectivity to claims to identify the facts. OAWP fulfilled that duty. My staff independently came to similar conclusions as OAWP based on the hundreds of thousands of pages of evidence reviewed, and I'm going to walk through those findings. The evidence supports that there were 2 VA supervisors who engaged in inappropriate conduct with subordinate employees. I'll repeat that again. The evidence supports that there were 2 VA supervisors who engaged in inappropriate conduct with subordinate employees. The evidence supports that 4 VA supervisors failed to take prompt and appropriate action to address claims of misconduct. OAWP recommended discipline and additional training for those supervisors. This type of misconduct can never be tolerated in an organization, and VA must do everything they can to restore employee confidence and morale at ORMDI. Now, while OAWP substantiated some very serious allegations brought forth in this investigation, it was unable to corroborate a number of serious claims about the overall climate at ORMDI. The evidence does not support that there is a culture of ORMDI leadership purposefully ignoring claims of harassment. The evidence does not support that supervisors retaliated against employees for turning down sexual advances. The evidence does not support that ORMDI's senior leaders engaged in waste, mismanagement, or perjury. Finally, the evidence does not support the existence of, to use the majority's phrase, a systemic sexual cesspool at ORMDI. The conspiracy that the majority has pushed is not reflective of reality. It is not reflective of the facts, and facts do matter. Nothing is more important than the truth. My colleagues across the aisle are either being intentionally reckless and cavalier with the truth or willfully blind as they continue to push their narrative of widespread misconduct at ORMDI. The speech and debate clause may insulate my colleagues from the accountability for the lies and half-truths that they continue to spread about this investigation, but the lives and reputations that they have ruined should weigh heavily on their consciences. This investigation uncovered troubling allegations of nepotism, tampering with congressionally mandated reports, and actions by some employees who may not be contributing to the mission of ORMDI. I am requesting the department investigate these claims more fully. And Mr. Chairman, I'm asking that you commit to working with me to request documents that will further the committee's investigations into these claims. So we will proceed to examine allegations of nepotism, tampering with congressionally mandated reports, and actions by some employees who may not be contributing to the mission of ORMDI. That is what I hear the chairman agreeing to also investigate. I hope that the chairman will also pivot this committee back to its core responsibilities of conducting oversight and legislating when the issues warrant policy changes. Intertwined in this investigation of misconduct is a structural issue that we in Congress created for VA that has caused some lower-level employees to be concerned that VA is not complying with the law. But the situation is more nuanced than that. When we passed the Cleveland-Dole Act, a part of the Consolidated Appropriations Bill in late 2022, we included a provision that was in direct conflict with the Elijah Clemens Act, which was signed into law 2 years prior. We need to work with VA to address this error so that ORMDI can be aligned in a manner that is most effective to fulfill its mission. There are other steps this committee should take to ensure that A, misconduct is prevented at VA, that B, in the unfortunate circumstances when misconduct does occur, that employees and supervisors know and trust the process to report that misconduct and seek redress. Congressman Pappas's H.R. 6531, the Train VA Employees Act, would enable just that. Though this bill faced almost unanimous Republican opposition when offered as an amendment at last year's full committee markup, it has the co-sponsorship of every Democrat on this committee. I urge my colleagues across the aisle to join us in making this important bill law. Last month, this committee issued a subpoena for the first time in nearly 8 years. The committee compelled the production of documents despite the fact that VA was already producing documents. The committee has received over 1 terabyte of information from VA. Yet, I was confused to see a press release from the chairman last week stating that VA has not complied with the subpoena. I do not in any way agree with that assertion. It is my belief that VA has acted in good faith and has provided information at a reasonable pace. This committee is not a courtroom. We are not judges, nor are we juries. Oversight in this committee is not a trial. Oversight is the examination of facts and policies. It is the consideration of what is working and what is not working. And in the case of this committee, it is the assessment of what is working for veterans. That is the framing I will employ today as I listen to the testimony and consider the evidence before us. And I invite all of my colleagues to do the same. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member for yielding back. And in regards to the ranking member's statement that I am misleading the public, let me read from the report itself. When you said no evidence of widespread sexual harassment, the OAWP's report, the actual quote is, "The mountain of evidence and testimony revealed an office replete with misconduct, including misconduct by organized leaders, which spawned an environment which inappropriate conduct was rampant." That is the report, and exactly as the report is written. Also, when questioning whether we have received, even in the testimony that the Secretary is going to give, he will say that not all of the things that we required in the subpoena have yet been delivered. So with that, we do, and I want to thank the Secretary for being here today. On our first panel, we have the Secretary, the Honorable Dennis McDonough, Secretary of the Veterans Affairs. Mr. Secretary, will the witness please stand and raise his right hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and let the record reflect the witness answered in the affirmative. Mr. Secretary, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I'm going to jump over several paragraphs to just get to the meat of the issue here, because we obviously have some issues to discuss. I understand, Mr. Chairman, and as you know, I'm sympathetic to the view expressed by you and others that the VA took too long to respond to your September 29, 2023 letter about allegations of misconduct at ORMDI. You invited me here this morning to discuss the department's response to that letter, and I welcome the opportunity to do so. VA success as a team depends on how we treat each other. That means every person at VA, every person entering a VA facility must feel safe. And it means that every VA employee must have a workplace free of harassment and discrimination. I take this issue very seriously and want to be crystal clear. VA does not tolerate sexual harassment. My unwavering commitment is to ensure that every employee works in a safe, welcoming, and harassment-free environment. Recently, ORMDI fell short of that. I assure veterans and this committee that we have treated these allegations of wrongdoing with seriousness. The 125-page OAWP report demonstrates that we moved aggressively to investigate them. VA will take appropriate disciplinary action in response to this investigation. And as Assistant Secretary Lau will describe more fully, in reaction to these learnings from ORMDI, VA is strengthening its policies, procedures, personnel training, and structure to improve its handling of sexual harassment allegations and help eliminate sexual harassment in the future. Mr. Chairman, you will recall on November 13th, we spoke by phone. You raised with me your concerns about allegations of misconduct at ORMDI. In that telephone call, you also mentioned that you had sent a letter to me on September 29 about allegations of sexual harassment and misconduct at ORMDI and expressed dismay that VA had not yet responded to that letter. As I told you during that conversation, I had no knowledge of having received your letter. That remains true today. I have no independent recollection of reading the letter or being aware of ORMDI allegations before our telephone conversation. Consequently, the following timeline of events is based on the research my staff has conducted and not on my personal knowledge. As is standard procedure with most congressional letters, your September 29 letter was received by the Office of Congressional and Legislative Affairs and forwarded to the VA Executive Secretariat. There it was assigned to the relevant VA organization responsible for the subject of the letter, in this case, HRNA, because, as you've stated, the allegations of sexual harassment and the ORMDI group itself fall squarely within HRNA's purview. After receiving your letter, HRNA personnel began drafting a response, focusing on addressing the 8 questions in your letter, including what government policies and regulations govern VA supervisor-subordinate relationships, or prohibit use of personal communications devices for official business, how many claims of sexual harassment within ORMDI had been brought, and how many AIBs or fact findings had been conducted involving ORMDI leadership. Unfortunately, HRNA did not take any significant action beyond compiling information to draft a response. Weeks later, your September 29 letter was placed in background materials that are made available in my daily briefing book, which includes a tab for letters, including from Congress. However, because of the large volume of materials that I've provided every day, including numerous letters from Congress, federal partners, state officials, VSOs, unions, and the like, I often don't get a chance to review all those background materials. I have no recollection of having received or reviewed the September 29 letter until you raised it with me on our November 13 phone call. It also appears that on October 17, I received emails from an employee raising allegations of sexual harassment at ORMDI. I forwarded these allegations to our acting general counsel, since it involved a pending EEO action, and copied 2 EEO-related addresses at the U.S. Postal Service. That is to say, the incoming copied those 2 addresses. I did not copy those 2 addresses. A few days later, the acting general counsel confirmed to me that his attorneys were working with HRNA to address the allegations. Although the documentary record shows that I forwarded this employee's email to legal counsel, I have no independent recollection of having done so. After the October 17, 2023 emails, there seemed to be considerable activity within ORMDI and HRNA regarding the allegations. The series of discussions and meetings are detailed in pages 54 through 58 of the OAWP report. According to the report, during this time, HRNA and ORMDI leadership began discussing detailing Davis out of ORMDI, convening an AIB to investigate the allegations. Former Assistant Secretary Grosso noted in her OAWP testimony that it was difficult to find an appropriate official to conduct the AIB investigation. The detailing of employees and establishment of the AIB did not occur until November 13th, 2023. I'm disappointed that HRNA did not move with more alacrity in detailing out the alleged bad actors and launching an investigation of the alleged misconduct at ORMDI. I also regret that I do not recall seeing your September 29 letter. However, it must be said that I took to heart the concerns you expressed in our November 13th call, and we have moved with dispatch to address these concerns and to respond to the committee investigation since that call. I'm firmly committed to ensuring that the department processes congressional letters more efficiently and effectively going forward. Now, the committee also appears to be interested in the sequence of events leading to former Assistant Secretary Grasso's resignation. During September, I'd come to the decision that we needed a change in leadership at HRNA OSP and had begun planning for Ms. Grasso's departure. At that time, I was unaware of the allegations involving ORMDI. At the end of the planning process, I had a conversation with Ms. Grosso and later exchanged emails with her on October 29 and 30 about scheduling her departure and how I would characterize it. As noted, I was not aware of the September 29 letter or any ORMD allegations until you, Mr. Chairman, brought them personally to my attention in November. Although I had decided a change of leadership was needed, I would like to emphasize that Ms. Grosso had a distinguished career of public service. She served honorably for 32 years in the United States Air Force, from which she retired as Lieutenant General and as the first female personnel chief in Air Force history. During her career, she also served as the chair of the Army and Air Force Exchange Services Board of Directors and chair of the Commissaries Agencies Board. Her command positions include the 1st DoD Tri-Service Base at Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst. I appreciate her service. With that, I yield to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony, and we will proceed to questions. I will recognize myself for, and with the ranking member knowing and understanding, for as much time as I may consume, but I will give you equal time, and then we'll go to 5 minutes after that for the members. So, Mr. Secretary, so when did you first become aware of the sexual harassment allegations there at that we're discussing today?
As I just testified in our phone call.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
As I just testified in our phone call.
Okay. Who put your briefing binder together?
My front office staff.
Okay. So I sent you the allegation. I sent you the allegations in that letter on September 29th. When that letter was put into your briefing book, you were very specific with many dates in your testimony, but not this one. So do you know what date that letter was put in?
I don't know specifically. It's 17 or 18 October, I think.
Okay. Okay, you also said in your testimony that the reasons you don't remember my letter is that you often don't review all the background material in your briefing book. A chairman's letter, is that considered background material?
No, it's an important document, obviously.
Okay. Does your staff understand that?
Well, yeah, and we've updated our processes now to ensure that they get flagged.
Okay. How much of your briefing book do you typically read? You know, I mean, I'm sure it's huge, but
I typically read the whole thing, but I don't read the letters tab every day, and I've just acknowledged it.
if one of your subordinates receives allegation of sexual harassment and didn't act on them, and then told you they don't have an independent recollection of seeing them, how would you consider that excuse?
It's a hypothetical. I'm not sure I really follow it.
Well, I'm concerned because our job of oversight, you see the frustration we're feeling. We send a letter. It's not, I mean, you and I send a lot of letters back and forth. We really do. But for not having a staff say, okay, this is dead serious. You know, it's one thing if we're talking about this is the issue that has been given testimony after testimony after testimony on how we would not do this. But yet your staff didn't say, Ms. Secretary, this letter from the chairman is, and that's just me commenting. You don't have to comment on that.
Well, look, Mr. Chairman, it's my responsibility to have seen the letter when it was presented to me, and I regret that, obviously. And you and I talk all the time, by phone, by text.
We do.
Exchange letters. I take that very seriously.
So when did the whistleblower contact you with the evidence of sexual harassment?
I received a text on either October 17 or 18. I forget the exact date.
Okay. Was it it was text?
I'm sorry, an email.
Email, okay.
Yeah.
Did you look at the evidence right then?
I did not look at the attachment, no.
Okay.
It would be fairly standard for me to not click on an attachment of a document that I was not expecting, in as much as that's how malware travels.
So all the graphic stuff that we saw here that, like I said, that we became so disgusted with, that was in there, but you didn't open it?
I did. It was an attachment. I have subsequently read a set of documents. I assume to this day, but I don't know to this day, that that's what was attached to that email. So you characterized it to me on the phone, though.
So on what date did your office respond to the whistleblower, and what did they tell them?
I don't have an answer on the response to the whistle. First of all, this was an employee. To this day, I don't know who the whistleblower is, and I'm not seeking to find out. What I heard from this employee, I can't record to you today precisely what was communicated back to that employee.
Okay, from what we have in our possession, on November 2nd, one of the staff emailed and said they would follow up on this particular email. So if
Emailed to the employee?
to the employee, yes. But then obviously the answer for my next question would be you don't know, because I was going to ask, do you remember if anyone followed up? And you wouldn't know.
I was assured that our team was working the issue.
Okay. And according to the whistleblower, there was no follow-up. And my suggestion, because my next question was why didn't your office follow up? My suggestion would be that you find out why and make sure that this is so serious. And you know that. And that's why this continues to be the question. So in your written testimony, you wrote that you copied the Postal Service. Your verbal testimony contradicted, and so can you clarify that for me? So which way did it go? I mean, you forwarded it, but
the email came to me.
Okay.
I was among several people on the 2 line. I don't know if several, among people on the 2 line, including the Postal Service inspectors who oversee ORMDI EEO complaints. Okay. It was an EEO complaint. It appeared to me to have, it appears to that, in that email, to be sent to the appropriate organization that oversees EEO complaints for ORMDI.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, the documentary evidence suggests I forwarded it on, as I said, to Acting General Counsel, and then received assurance that it is being worked.
So this is a tough question, but I'm going to ask it. Are you responsible for the failure?
Look, I'm responsible for everything that happens at VA. I've said that to you in this room many times.
But
I feel that to be the case.
And I agree the buck stops with you. I said that in my statement. And like it does with if something happens with my staff.
Yeah.
But we still need to know who truly failed downline from you. And are you holding that person responsible?
Look, the person to be held responsible on whether I saw your letter is me. That's on me.
Right.
We are updating our procedures to ensure that we get everything in a timely way. And I'll do better on that, but the person who failed here is me.
I do thank you for being here today, and we are going to continue with the questions. I will yield back, and Ranking Member, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the evidence detailed in the OAWP report supports that 4 individuals within VA, within ORMDI, were engaged in misconduct or failed to act appropriately, and they must be held accountable. So kind of following the chairman's question about who below you needs to be held accountable, I think this gets at this in a more thorough, exact way. My question to you, Mr. Secretary, is when will discipline be carried out for those individuals found to have committed wrongdoing in this investigation?
So I want to be really careful here because I can't get involved in the disciplinary action or the timing. So I can just tell you that we take it deadly seriously.
At your level, Mr. Secretary, you are at the top, and my question is, you have to maintain a level of independence from ORMDI.
Well, I have to avoid any appearance that I'm trying to provide command influence on the decision.
And why is that?
Because the rules of how the civil service works protect the due process rights of the employees.
So we're talking several layers below you, I don't know, 5, 6 levels of management below you, or however many lines that are below you. There's an appeals process when these sorts of accusations happen, and they must make their way up to you. And so, so is there? When you say you have to maintain a sense of impartiality, is that what is the principle here?
I think it's partially that, although, you know, the structure of the decision-making is only part of the issue. The other issue is I don't want to create an impression that I'm commanding a particular outcome.
I see. So you truly do want OAWP to have a certain integrity to its processes when it investigates serious allegations.
You know, one of the points in my prepared remarks that I, for purposes of time, skipped over is I think the OAWP is a more effective organization now than it has been. Its investigations are handled much, much more quickly. Its disciplinary recommendations are acted on in the overwhelming majority of instances. All of that is a function of its professionalism and a function of by the way, its relationship with you all on this committee, and a function of our not letting it become what some thought it had appeared to become, which is a political organization. So I'm going to make sure that I maintain that posture.
Well, I will say that the ORMDI, the Office of Whistleblower Protection, at one time did seem to, for many, have a reputation for being a place that one would not want to go to lodge a complaint, because they were fearful that that office was being used to actually do the opposite. And they were not confident that that office would, one, protect them, or two, investigate thoroughly or fairly. And I can say would you agree?
That was surely the perception I arrived, yes.
But would we both agree, and I think all of us would agree here, that for a department of 450,000 employees, that whistleblowers are an important part
Vital. Absolutely vital.
And to have an Office of Whistleblower Protection is also, with integrity, is also very important.
Absolutely vital.
And I would agree with you that the ORMDI has come a long distance and has provided a very important service in this case. Mr. Secretary, ORMDI is in desperate need of new leadership that will instill confidence, trust, and discipline among its employees. Have you begun the search and selection process for a permanent Deputy Assistant Secretary for ORMDI?
We just recently filled the Assistant Secretary job with a very experienced VA professional. I think I'll let you make your own judgments, but I have unending confidence in her capability. She'll testify before you forthwith. We are allowing the Assistant Secretary to get up and running, and then to begin the search for the new ORMDI head.
Do you have any thoughts as to, what went into the process of selecting the current Assistant Secretary, and the leadership qualities you sought in this person and that you would seek in others who would fill the remaining positions that remain to be filled?
My sense is you'll experience this in several minutes, but I'm looking for somebody who's candid, somebody who's transparent, somebody who's tough. Cassie Law is all those things, and she has great experience in VA, from the field to the headquarters.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Thank you, Member. Dr. Miller Meeks, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the committee for having this hearing. I want to thank Secretary McDonough for being here.
Thank you, Doc.
And Secretary McDonough, let me just say that I don't consider this to be a partisan or political process. I am of the age where I experienced sexual harassment as a clerk
I'm
in
sorry
the
about that.
military, as a nurse in the military, as a physician. I went to medical school when there were less than 20% of women in medical school classes.
We're lucky you did.
And even to this day, when I interview people for jobs in my office, I don't ask their age, their marital status, whether or not they have children, because of all of the training I've received, and the lines are so tenuous on what's acceptable and what is unacceptable. And so, do you know the role and the mission of ORMDI?
I do.
Can you tell me what it is?
It's to protect the agency employees and veterans from all forms of harassment.
Correct. And does the VA have a zero tolerance policy for harassment?
It does.
And let me specifically read to you at va.gov, ORMD, sexual harassment. Another form of harassment prohibited by harassment prevention policy for federal agencies. Conduct of a sexual nature includes physical conduct, visual behavior seen, leering, ogling, gestures, expressions, objects, images, videos, intentional body exposure, behavior heard or read, catcalls, whistles, hey baby, jokes, teasing, flirtations, name-calling, pressure for sex, sex favors, emails, text messages, graphics, notes, internet content. Have what you've seen here today, have they fallen under that category?
Certainly, activity outlined in the OAWP report does not, falls within that category, one. And two, you know, it was in my submitted testimony, but I left it out for purposes of time. I think that some of this behavior suggests a real culture issue in ORMDI.
Yes, culture starts at the top.
Correct.
And you have a top that is rotten. And that's very explicit in the emails, in the text messages, in the whistleblower testimony. Do you believe in the pledge that you took, the white ribbon pledge,
I do.
to combat sexual harassment at the, then can you please explain to me how, once you're aware of this, from Ms. Grosso? Thanks, Gina, I appreciate your quick response. How about you choose the last day that works best for you, and let's work on an announcement for you next week, where she says to you, I'm very sorry I did not perform up to the appropriate standard. What the hell standard was she applying to? A CEO of a company would have to be resigned for having consensual relations with an employee of either sex. I find it that this is an office that is to prevent and address sexual harassment, to train individuals in sexual harassment. How is the rest of the organization supposed to respond when those that are in that office can't even bother to address an employee's concerns? So that employee comes to us, a Committee on Veterans Affairs, to complain about their organization. And the response is, we'll make sure that we have the right message that goes across so we don't damn your reputation, and make sure you have a soft fall. You know, the American people are so upset and angry that no one in the federal government is held accountable. I'm held accountable every single 2 years. Every 2 years, I am held accountable. My name is on the ballot. You're hiring a person to take over this position who is a long-term VA employee. I will tell you, I could care less if they're a long-term VA employee. What I want is someone who can recognize that there may be sexual harassment and does a proper investigation. And if Ms. Grosso didn't know how to do a proper investigation as per her emails, then she darn sure has counsel available to her to do that. I find the conduct of this office deplorable. It is not heartening. It is not encouraging to all of the employees who work in the VA system, who work their tails off to help our veterans, of which I'm a fellow veteran. This should be taken seriously. It should not be thought of as political, and the VA should address this matter immediately, and all of those people apologize, not be given jobs and elsewhere. There should be appropriate discipline. As I said, if I were in the private sector, as my job as a physician or a nurse, I would not be allowed to conduct myself in this manner. There would be repercussions and there would be consequences. With that, I yield.
Dr. Miller-Meeks, I very much appreciate the comments and the question. I just want to underscore that my decision to relieve Assistant Secretary Grosso presaged predated my understanding about what was happening in RMDI. And in my career, I've relieved many leaders. I've never thought it was useful to embarrass those leaders, let alone somebody who served the country like you, as honorably as Gina Grosso did. So I just wanted to respond directly to your question.
Representative Brownlee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see you, Mr. Secretary.
Ma'am.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, as your testimony made very, very clear, but I feel like we can't say it enough, that every VA employee deserves to work in a harassment-free environment.
Amen.
And I certainly agree with OAW's findings and recommendations for discipline, and I hope VA will act expeditiously to carry out the recommended discipline. Mr. Chairman, I have a few things that I wanted to get off of my chest. At our last meeting, I voted with you on your proposal to subpoena more documents. But now I know of OAWP's findings and conclusions that seem to be quite the contrary from what was stated in that meeting, and I feel somewhat misled. It seems to me that as the majority has carried out the investigation, I think they've tried to perhaps paint a picture and paint themselves as a party for women. Carefully crafted remarks may sound like they support women, but I need to point out that their voting records and actions paint a different story, and let me just explain. Earlier this Congress, the majority let the authority for the Women's Veterans Task Force I've long championed quietly expire. The task force served a critical role in making sure members were hearing directly from women veterans about the specific challenges they face. Women veterans deserve regular member-level engagement so we can improve the care and services they receive at the VA, and I will continue to advocate for the reauthorization of the task force. It seems to me that you and your colleagues have been somewhat on a crusade to restrict the reproductive health care for our nation's women's veterans. Since January of 2023, Mr. Chairman, you've sent 6 letters to the VA demanding sensitive information about the abortion care veterans have received through the VA, invading their privacy and scrutinizing the decisions they make with their health care providers. I also want to state that 6 of the 8 Republicans on this committee who were serving in Congress in 2022 voted against the last legislative package that reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act. I know this bill is outside the committee's jurisdiction, but I must point out this bill, because the Violence Against Women Act mandates the protections for survivors of domestic violence and for individuals who have experienced sexual assault and harassment in the workplace, exactly the topic we are discussing today. So I hope we're not here for cynical reasons or political reasons to try and portray that the majority on this committee is for women and the minority is not. If this investigation is about protecting women, what about all of the other women who were wrongly accused of engaging in inappropriate sexual relations with an ORMDI senior leader? The majority has publicized and named names and publicized these allegations, which seem to be wholly unsubstantiated based on the report, and I think we need to make the record clear. I know now that on the January 11th meeting, your staff had evidence in hand to refute these allegations. OAWP conducted interviews with all 6 of the women who were alleged victims of sexual harassment, and each and every one of them denied having any sexual or inappropriate relationship with their boss. They were also shocked and embarrassed to find out such rumors were being spread around their office. Members of this committee were forced to vote one way or the other to subpoena additional documents, but while failing to present, I believe, the full picture from all of the evidence it seems you already had. At that meeting, I trusted that the truth was being presented, but I feel like it wasn't, that I was misled and that we were all misled. And as I said at the January 11th meeting, we always must seek the truth. So I just had to get that off my chest. Now, Mr. Secretary, I wanted to ask you, I know in the OAW's report, something stood out to me that the OAWP did not specifically substantiate that 2 of the alleged perpetrators, if you will, committed sexual harassment. So they didn't say sexual harassment. What they said was they engaged in inappropriate conduct of a sexual nature. And so I think, we've been talking about, oh, my time is up. I had a very important question to ask, but I will ask the next panel the same question. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just can't believe that people are trying to turn this into a political discussion. This has nothing to do with politics. I promise you, I would be in the same exact manner if it were on the Republican side and we were in the majority. This is about women. This is about an individual who was sexually harassed and the VA ignored it. This has nothing to do with politics. I take great umbrage at the insinuation that this is a witch hunt because of the administration that is in power right now. That is not why we are here. Mr. Secretary, thank you for coming. Do you believe Chairman Bost has been fair to you in this investigation?
I think that the committee's always been fair to me.
All right, do you believe this is a political motivated witch hunt?
I'm staying out of the political.
No, I
business.
ask you, you're
I
a
think
political appointee.
I think you guys are asking very important questions. I've made clear to you time and again that I believe your oversight makes us a more effective organization. And
Do you believe this committee has oversight over the VA?
even if I didn't believe it, you do have oversight.
We do have constitutional oversight. Yes, we do.
Correct. It's outlined in Article 1, which they should have made Article 3.
I
but-
wasn't cranky before I start this, but I mean, this is not a political witch hunt. All right, let me get back to my questions. Can you recall any other whistleblower allegations regarding sexual harassment within the VA itself?
I think there's two things that give me pause in answering the question. One is, oftentimes I don't know what the difference between a whistleblower and an employee is.
Well, let me ask you this then separately. Do you have a recollection, a direct recollection, of any employees ever making sexual harassment complaints at the VA against other employees?
I think I remember IG reports on such activity. So, yeah, I think I have some recollections.
All right, so then I feel it extremely odd then, if it's so minor, that such a horrendous accusation would be made against another employee at the VA, that your staff would not elevate that to a discussion rather than sticking something in a binder that where you say you read all the letters normally, you do all that all of a sudden this is not. It's just turned into the ether.
Yeah. Look, I understand that, and I wish I didn't have to say what I've said, but what I've told you is the truth.
I hope, have you had a discussion with your staff as to why this was not a communication rather than something just stuck in a binder?
We've definitely changed our process to make sure that that we handle incoming letters with even greater.
But I mean, even in this specific department, where this is the department that's supposed to investigate this, that this is not about getting enough, hospital beds at a VA, this, that, and the other stuff. This is an absolute serious allegation that goes on,
Yeah.
that should be not approved or not disciplined in any part of government, or in business for that
Should
matter.
not be tolerated anywhere. You're absolutely right about that. And I think what I tried to spell out in my testimony was that there was moments when it seemed it was getting traction, but then,
Well, let me ask this. So what do you say to the whistleblower's comment that this type of activity is commonplace at the VA?
I say to all of our employees that my commitment to you is that you work in a safe environment.
So I believe you. I absolutely believe you, and I believe you have that personal opinion. But unless that opinion is put in action.
Understand?
So let me ask you, with Ms. Grosso, did you ask for her resignation or did she offer it?
I told the assistant secretary that I'd lost confidence in her. And
Did you have a personal conversation with her regarding this, or you had somebody else?
regarding
Ms. Grosso and her employment.
yeah, I had a personal conversation.
And did you personally point blank ask her to resign?
I did.
I would have. I mean, my goodness. And so when we talk about a soft landing, what is a soft landing?
I don't know that I use the word soft landing. I'm not sure. As I said,
I thought that was in an email.
I don't know that I use that language. So
Anyway, I get it. If somebody's getting service, I get this. I'm not trying to come down. I'm coming down on the action, not the person.
Yeah.
And if she's done service to the VA, yeah. But you know what? We all are captains of all our ships. And when we do something this egregious, when we turn a blind eye, there needs to be discipline, not just basically pushing away the problem. And that's what's happened here. I hope that particular behavior of not making it vacate, poof, go appear, disappear, regardless of which party is in power, does not occur in this government.
I think this is why the OAWP report and our commitment in the context of that report and the commitment that I've restated here today to you to ensure that that report informs disciplinary action is so important.
I'm over my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Levin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, good to see you.
Sir.
Let me begin by saying that we're all deeply troubled to hear about these allegations, and as you said, our public servants at VA deserve a safe work environment. I think we're all committed to partnering to conduct the oversight that's needed. My hope is that we remember our responsibility to seek the truth and to do so objectively. Leave politics at the door. I want to thank our Democratic Committee staff. They have worked day and night and through several weekends to index every single piece of the hundreds of thousands of pages of evidence VA has provided in response to the majority's extensive document requests. Thousands of pages of documents were identified as responsive to the subpoena this committee issued in January, and this investigation has shown us that there is important oversight work that this committee needs to undertake related to the ORMDI realignment. It's clear that we need to work with you, Mr. Secretary, to address the issues related to organizational alignment of ORMDI within the agency. It's important for all my colleagues to understand that there is a conflict in current law. The Elijah Cummings Act of 2020 requires the equal employment opportunity functions to report directly to the Secretary, while the Cleland-Dole bill we passed in late 2022 requires EEO functions to report to the Deputy Secretary. Additionally, a single senator was able to push through a problematic provision, happens quite a bit around here, in the Cleland-Dole law that capped the number of EEO counselors at VA, and this has led to other structural issues that prevent VA from fully complying with congressional mandates to realign its EEO functions. So to the extent that you need help with any of this, Mr. Secretary, we are ready to assist. Along these lines, Mr. Secretary, what steps has VA taken or are you taking to realign ORMDI?
Well, I want to just, Assistant Secretary Law will be in a position to talk in more detail about this, but we have looked at and teed up a variety of options to undertake this, but we are on the crux of a challenge, meaning there is competing statutory requirements. So this would be one of the things that Assistant Secretary Law will be in a position to talk about. I do want to just say that Assistant Secretary Law, from the moment she started in this job, has been taking corrective action on our procedures, on our processes, on our structure as it relates to ORMDI and EEO, and requiring each of us across the agency to do a stand down on the issues that each of you has raised around sexual harassment in a safe work environment for all employees. So where we can take action, we are taking aggressive action, informed by this horrendous, objectionable set of actions that we're all discussing today.
And fair to say, Mr. Secretary, that in addition to the formal review of realignment processes within ORMDI, you'll commit to providing the results of this review to this committee?
Yes, fair to say.
Mr. Secretary, under the current structure, the Assistant Secretary of Human Resources and Administration Operations, Security, and Preparedness, quite a title, oversees both EEO complaints and personnel decisions. Seems VA is constrained by the number of assistant secretaries that it has. Do you think it's worth considering a reorganization of assistant secretaries to make sure oversight and responsibility is equitably distributed for HR and investigations?
I think that we should have that conversation with you all, and I think Cassie will be in a position to have a little bit of it now. But I guess I also just want to underscore that I don't think that these structural challenges, as important as they are and as important as it is that we resolve them, does not obviate my failing in this instance to make sure that we got going on this much more quickly than we did. That said, we're on top of it now.
Appreciate it. I hope we use this moment to figure out what we can do better in terms of the structure that VA uses to ensure the best working environment for everybody at the VA, and specifically when we have a challenge where we've got two existing statutes that are in direct contradiction to one another. I hope we can all agree to work together in a collaborative way to fix it, and hopefully the Senate doesn't mess it up, as they did this past time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Logan. Mr. Franklin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time here with us today. I know you have a lot of directives that are under your purview, and so you may not be familiar with this one specifically, but VA Directive 5979 is the harassment prevention policy. Within that, it says VA Directive 5979 requires immediate and appropriate action to be taken by management when notified of hostile conduct that is or has the potential to become severe or pervasive to the point that it constitutes a legal claim of sexual or non-sexual harassment. It goes on to say that it requires VA administration, staff, officer, managers, and supervisors to immediately begin to address, and it says specifically within 5 business days, any incident of inappropriate or harassing behavior. But then it further goes on to say that in the cases of alleged sexual harassment, VA managers are required to conduct initial intervention measures to separate the person who brings forth the allegation from the person accused of sexual harassment within 1 business day of a sexual harassment allegation. So I wasn't around for when a couple of these things got put in, the Cummings Act that preceded me in 2020. That particular measure required that the person responsible for EEO report directly to the head of the federal agency, and that wasn't VA specific, that's all federal agencies. I suspect that part of that is because there's been a history of the word not getting to the person at the top who's ultimately responsible, and as you say, I mean, the buck stops with you. Then subsequently in 2022, there was the Cleveland-Dole Veterans Benefits and Healthcare Improvement Act that we've discussed here that does create a conflict because it says the CEO person should report to the deputy secretary. I think it's become a red herring here, and we're saying that because there's conflict, we can't do anything. Well, in reality, in your agency, the solution to not really knowing how to deal with the conflict is to comply with neither. And in fact, within the 125-page report, there's a graphic that lists the chain of command. It's kind of hard to read, and I had to kind of map it out for myself. But between you and the person who either is supposed to report to you or to your deputy secretary, There's also the former position held by Ms. Grasso, the Assistant Secretary for HRA and OSP, which very specifically is not supposed to be in that chain of command for persons or for reasons potentially of it being tainted. The Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of HRA and OSP, which in this case was held by Mr. Mayo. And then finally, you get to the Deputy Assistant Secretary of ORMDI, in this case, in the allegations we're talking about here, Mr. Harvey Johnson. So he was 4 levels removed from you, according to Cummings, 3 levels removed from the Deputy Secretary under the other act. So in either case, there's no way that your agency can be complying with the directive, your own directive, that it's going to be a sexual harassment allegation is going to be dealt with within a day. I mean, do you agree with that assessment or not?
I just tried to say to Mr. Levin that I believe that these issues about reporting on EEO are important structural questions, but I do not believe that they obviate us from responsibility or forgive my leadership failings and not ensuring that that person in question was detailed out more quickly. And I said that in my opening remarks as well. I regret that greatly.
Mr. Secretary, reclaim my time, and thank you for that. You know, I did find it interesting in going back through some of the testimony that we'd received. When asked about VA's noncompliance with Cleland Dole in his OAWP interview, Mr. Mayo, who, let me go back to my little roster here of who's who in the zoo, the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for HRA and OSP, he was asked about noncompliance, and his response was, this is to the OAWP interview, what's the political risk? It's not like we're the only agency that doesn't comply with the EEOC. That's the only time, candidly, in all of this, the word political has come up. This is not political from my view, and I really hope my colleagues don't take it that way. It's never been brought up from our side over here, but someone in your chain of command is viewing this situation of sexual harassment through the lens of political risk. Do you see it that way? Do you, is the department choosing to not follow Cleland Dole because they don't see a political risk in failing to do so?
Yeah, I can't speak for Jeff in that regard.
But for yourself, I mean, is there?
I'm not here. I don't think this is a political job. I'm not here for a political undertaking. I just acknowledge to you that these are my leadership failings, and I own them.
And I would hope so. But in reading your letter from last night that you sent us over, it reads like a dog ate my homework. I mean, you've got every excuse under the sun for why.
I didn't make any excuse. I accept the responsibility, as I just said again today.
Well, we have a few that went longer, Mr. Chairman. Could I have just a few more seconds? I mean, but Mr. Secretary, in your statement, you say, I understand, and as you know, I am sympathetic to the view expressed by you and others that the VA took too long. Did the VA take too long or not? I mean,
yes.
You probably didn't read this. Is this written by your attorneys? Because that's sure what it reads
And
like.
I wrote it, and I said in the testimony, I reiterate again, I regret how long it took, and I'm not only do I regret it, but I accept the responsibility for it.
When letters were sent to you from the chairman, you had no knowledge of receiving the letter. Later, when it was placed in background materials, you weren't sure if it was ever there. You don't recall ever reading it.
Frankly.
I mean, on and on and on. Sir, I would submit that you're too insulated from the problem, and we've passed laws as Congress to put the source closer to you so that you're aware of those things. And I get that you have 400,000 employees that you're responsible for. We all have over 800,000 bosses every day.
Yeah, I hear you. I've not made any representations about any of the issues you just raised. I want to make sure that I run a flat organization where employees can get to me.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging my extra time, and I yield back. Thank you.
Representative Lozio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, good morning. I think
Sir.
Good afternoon now. I first want to echo the ranking member's remarks about the seriousness of OAWP's findings. I think you agree, and like my colleagues, urge you and VA leadership to swiftly carry out discipline for those implicated. However, I am deeply concerned about some of the irresponsibility I've seen leading up to today, ignoring due process that in any other form that lacks the protection of the speech and debate clause could likely open up folks to civil liability. The allegations OAWP substantiated are serious ones. And VA is and must be dealing with them at the highest levels, as you are here today. And our oversight there is critical. But OAWP investigated 33 allegations they did not substantiate. Many of those were ones the majority made publicly without sufficient factual evidence to back them up. And baseless allegations of improper relationships can ruin folks' lives. Relying on rumors presented by some employees while an investigation is still underway, I don't think is appropriate. Yet the majority insisted on putting on a public spectacle, degrading some of those folks again while the investigation was not yet complete. To be sure, there are serious problems here the VA must address, but Democratic Committee staff reviewed the interviews that OAWP conducted under oath, thousands of pieces of evidence, and came to the same conclusion as OAWP. The allegation that ORMDI is riddled with systemic sexual misconduct just isn't backed up by the facts. So I'm disappointed to see some colleagues pushing that narrative. Reputations of many faithful VA employees can be tarnished, for many without the evidence there to back up the accusations. With that, Mr. Secretary, I'll ask you a pretty basic question. Do you have the authorities you need to swiftly carry out discipline recommended by OAWP in this case?
I do.
Okay, thank you. I have concerns about the majority's Restore VA Accountability Act, which I fear can serve as another attempt to gut due process under the guise of wanting more accountability. The latter goal, accountability, is something I think we all share as part of our oversight goal. If the Restore VA Accountability Act had been enacted, would that have changed anything about the authorities that you already have or need here?
It's such a hypothetical, so let me answer the question this way, which is my experience in leading the department for the last 3+ years is that it's most effective when we can deal with the employees with clear established rules rather than finding ourselves when we take disciplinary action before administrative bodies or federal courts. I worry, and I've had this communication in public and in private with the chairman and with the ranking member and with many other members of the committee, so I feel comfortable stating it here because they're not going to be hearing it for the first time. I would like the ability to make sure that we can manage the department pursuant to clear rules so that we can hold our employees accountable. Changes over the last several years complicated our ability to carry out disciplinary action and more often got us before, as I said, administrative bodies or federal courts rather than in a position to resolve the issue for our employees or for the veterans.
To take it back to the initial query here, you have the authorities you need to mete out whatever discipline is recommended by the report.
I believe we do, and we have taken important disciplinary action. You know, one of the members of this committee raised very serious allegations with me about Montana. We took those deadly seriously, and we acted based on the authorities we had. And you'll get it. You have a front row seat to see how we do on this one, and I acknowledge that. So far, I think the jury's out, as the chairman said. I get that, but we're not hiding anything here. We're going to get this done.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman kneels back. Representative Van Orden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be frank, I had no intention of addressing this in this manner. Mr. Secretary, I'll be with you in a moment. But, I'm just not going to sit here and listen to members of this committee, particularly the ranking member, do these spurious, inflammatory, disingenuous, and blatantly politicized comments that can very easily be construed to be defending the gross misconduct by senior leaders in the VA and have a chilling effect on people who may be sexually harassed as we speak. Wholly inappropriate. And to attempt to justify sexual harassment because it was reported by a lower level employee is offensive. Because I used to be the lower level employee, sir. I started at the bottom, cleaning toilets on a tugboat in the Navy. And so for you to say that a lower level employee should not be able to report these things is the reason that Congress's approval rating is just above a root canal. So knock it off. You. Seems like the lunatics have taken over the asylum. And you know I have tremendous personal respect for you. I do. And I know that you have an incredibly difficult job. But I got to tell you what, man. Leaders have to protect those we have been given the privilege to lead. Just as we, as members of Congress, have to protect those that we have been given constitutional authority of oversight to make sure that our employees who are, our constituents and our fellow veterans are protected from the acts, that it's just crystal clear. No one is debating whether or not this stuff took place, and it's horrendous. And I have to say that I believe that this is a systemic issue in the Veterans Affairs Administration, but also, unfortunately, in the Biden cabinet. You're the second member of the cabinet that has had some very significant issues with something that could be very readily addressed, sir. And they're called Commander's Critical Information Requirements. So just as the Secretary of Defense failed to notify the President that he'd be hospitalized for a very reasonable reason, having cancer, and I do wish him well. If you had established procedures, like getting a letter from the chairman of the committee that's responsible for writing the paychecks for your people, essentially, that should go to the top of your list, I think a lot of this could have been avoided. So I have had the privilege of leading thousands of men and women throughout my career in the Navy, and I've always made sure that these things that rise to this level of importance, like people being sexually harassed or being discriminated against in any way, I never tolerated that in my presence. And sir, if you do not tolerate these things in your presence, I would encourage you to elevate these types of issues to an immediate report to you. So you are the commander, you're the captain of your ship. And if these things are important to you, which I believe they are, I would hope that you would stress this to your staff. And if they're not meeting your standard, that you get rid of them. And if you're incapable of meeting your own standard, then maybe you should think about doing something else. And I would hope that that would not be the case. I do have confidence in you. I want every single veteran to go to the VA to get health care, mental health care, so that they can thrive as citizens. So I have one question for you, and that's in regards to the subpoena that you were issued. Has the VA been fully compliant with that subpoena to the best of your knowledge?
Yeah, so we are being compliant, but we have not yet provided all the documents that have been asked for. And that's not a function of us withholding the documents, it's a function of us getting through all the documents. And
Very well. Do you have an approximate timeline?
We're providing thousands of documents a week. So we're, and we have been, since I made a commitment to the chairman to get him those documents. And so I get that you're not going to take the heat off us until we get them to you. I understand that.
Very well. I would encourage you to elevate this to the level commensurate with how seriously we're taking this as a committee. Thank you for your time. With that, I yield back.
Thank you.
Representative Sheplis McCormick, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I stated at the last business meeting last month, I'm incredibly concerned about the committee's maintaining the anonymity of the victim of the unwanted contact from a supervisor. The victim requested anonymity, and the victim deserves anonymity. We have already heard from other employees at VA that they were guessing who was involved, based on the press conference and the public letters from the majority. The way this has been handled, like a trial in the court of public opinion, has been very reckless. Mr. Secretary, what safeguards does the VA have in place to protect individuals who decide to report harassment or sexual or otherwise, and misconduct at the VA?
I think this would be an important question to explore with the Acting Assistant Secretary Geit, but we both have established procedures on protecting the identity of our employees, and then the law that you all passed to create the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection gives us additional authorities to protect our employees there.
What is being done to reassure employees that their concerns will be taken seriously and that they will be handled fairly and objectively?
One of the reasons I accepted the chairman's invitation to appear today is to underscore to our employees by appearing today how seriously I personally take the allegations. So that's one example of our effort to try to communicate directly to our employees that not only do we badly need their candor and their transparent reaction to what they're experiencing, but we're committed to protecting them when they do so.
And after this experience, do you have any recommendations that you would put forth to make sure that these situations or situations that rise to this level are handled?
I think, I don't have a particular response on that as it relates to protection of the employees, but I think it will be important for us to get a sense of where employees are. I will say that I am concerned about workplace safety. I'm concerned also about the fact that ORMDI, in light of the details out, in light of the challenges there, I've been worried that our employees, especially in this moment where, for example, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia appear to be on the rise, that there may be employees who feel that they are experiencing such things and are not in a position to have an advocate at ORMDI or otherwise to be heard. So I did ask OAWP and one of our deputy chiefs of staff to do a public, to do a hard look at all of our reporting streams to make sure to identify if there is evidence of increased feelings of unsafety or disrespect for our employees. So we'll periodically do that, and if we need to address that through a climate review, a formal climate review, we will do that.
Thank you. I yield back.
Representative Siscomani, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bost, for your leadership on this effort to bring accountability to all tiers of leadership in the administration. Secretary McDonald, good to see you.
Sir.
Thank you for being here with us today. You know, I, as a husband and a father of 6 children, including 3 girls, these reports fill me with absolute disgust, I think, and that's a sentiment that could be expressed by the rest of the people in this room as well. To hear about the egregious acts and cultural rot perpetrated by senior staff within the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity, and Inclusion of all offices, that in particular is quite shocking. And as I've learned more through this process, it's even more disturbing. I hope, Mr. Secretary, that you will be direct and forthcoming here in your responses to my questions today, not only required obviously by oath, but also the well-being of those victims, your own team, your own employees in mind as well, and to have a back and forth direct conversation on this. My question is something where I read here on all the information in the testimony. You know, Ms. Grosso stated in her Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection report that she took so long to start an investigation because she wanted to find someone who was the same race and gender as the victim to run the investigation. Now, as a Hispanic male myself, and the father of 3 young Hispanic daughters, I want to know if it's the VA policy that they would need to wait an indefinite amount of time and, God forbid, possibly continue to endure harassment for an investigator to be available who fits a specific demographic checkbox.
That's not VA policy.
Can you expand on the reason for her to do that, for that to be the reasoning in that? And if it's not VA policy, then why was the assistant secretary that you appointed, why was she doing it?
I don't know. That's a question for her. I have not talked to her about that, and I don't know the answer to that.
So this isn't something that you would say has happened at any other time within your supervision of this?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And, and I think you've been upfront about this and acknowledging some of the missteps in this whole process. How do you feel about this particular response of hers? I know that she did it. You can't answer why she did it. You just told me that. But as her supervisor and the one who appointed her, what's your take on that response?
I said in my opening remarks, and I've said several times since, that I think it was a mistake that it took so long for the AIB to be stood up. I think it was a mistake that it took so long for the employees in question to be detailed out of their responsibilities. I think it turns out that a decision I made subsequently, which I think Assistant Secretary Lau will be in a position to testify about, which is to take the investigation out of the chain of command of HR&A entirely. And
Well,
put it in
let me reclaim my
OAWB
time here
was-
for just
was
a moment.
Was the right decision.
It was the time, but also the focus on race that really jumped out at me on this one. And my colleagues are covering different areas, and I'll focus on this one. How often does race play a part in how VA runs investigations? Because it seemed that this is the reason why it was prolonged. This case, you think it was a mistake of how long it took. It's not just the fact that it took so long, it's the reason that it took so long, which was a race-focused decision on this. So because of, according to Ms. Grosso, it was more important to focus on race than to helping the victim.
Yeah, what we're trying to get to in the investigation is the truth. The most important thing is the truth, which will inform our decisions about accountability. Again, I just can't comment about what Assistant Secretary Grosso was thinking at the time.
Well, it's in my point of asking these questions is not just to, obviously, she's not here, unfortunately, to answer. She abruptly resigned, and we know the story there. However, I'm trying to get some sense of this is prevalent among the entire organization, because one of your highest members in this organization, this is how she acknowledged it, was making these decisions based on race and how to help a victim or not. That is very troubling to me. Not only for minority groups, but for everyone that is involved in this. How is your senior leadership making decisions on whether to help someone or not? And when that is based on race, that's everything that we stand against, and that's everything that the men and women that served this nation fought for, to protect for all of us. So I find that very troubling, and I want to make sure that this is not happening anywhere else, and that there is some serious accountability on this particular issue, on using race to determine if a case gets investigated promptly or not.
Like I understand, I'm not rebutting the notion.
So I would like, in my few seconds left here that I'm already over, just a commitment from you and an assurance that this isn't an institutional issue.
Sure.
And that you will do all that you can to make sure that this never happens again.
The purpose of our investigations is the truth. The truth informs our disciplinary action and informs accountability, so that's the kind of operation we want to run. That's what
Mr. Secretary, I think the truth is on paper.
Gentlemen.
We've seen the truth. We've seen the reports on that. I think the truth is evident.
Gentlemen's time is expired.
What we need now is a commitment that this will never happen again. I yield back.
Representative Ramirez, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to start by recognizing how deeply re-traumatizing this hearing has to be for anyone listening who has suffered from the pain of sexual harassment, who knows what it's like to have experienced the misconduct or violence and the re-victimization of this particular investigation. I say this over and over. Pain should never be used as a political ammunition. And I have to say, I'm deeply troubled how many of my colleagues across the aisle have gone about this investigation. I believe that the approach my colleagues are following will cause lasting harm on how, as a nation, we address the very real threat of sexual violence and harassment in the workplace. Exploiting pain for political points is not going to get us closer to addressing the failures in federal policy that addresses sexual harassment, not in our agencies, not in our halls of Congress, and certainly not even in our offices. Sexual harassment and sexual violence is absolutely unacceptable, and it must be addressed with policy solutions. But I know this. To do so, the people need to trust that our agencies and us in Congress are working seriously to pursue solutions every day, not theatrics. You see, trust is important, and once it's broken, it's not easily repaired. So, Secretary, I want to come back to something you said a couple of minutes ago. And let me ask you this specific question around it. Are there conflicting laws that have made it difficult for the VA and the ORMDI to effectively regain and maintain the trust of VA employees?
I think that there are competing requirements on the EEO chain of command, and we can address those, but I want to just hasten one more time to say that none of those obviate our responsibility to ensure that our employees, when they speak, they're heard, that when they feel that they're being mistreated or they're working in an unsafe work environment, that they don't get support. And that's my biggest failing as a leader in this instance, that this employee felt that way. And I am bound and determined to make sure that doesn't happen again.
I want to follow up on that. So tell me a little bit about what you're personally doing to ensure that the trust is restored in not just ORMDI, but the organization who has a mission of serving other VA employees.
Well, I thought the appointment of a leader like Assistant Secretary Law into this position, with her experience of fighting aggressively for her fellow career employees at VA, was an important indication of that. Secondly, I have encouraged our employees to feel that they can reach me. I'm gratified to know that when this employee reached me, that at least in retrospect, that we appear to have gotten that rolling. I think that there's important learnings there, as the chairman pointed out, that we have to make sure that we close the loop back with that employee. Whether that employee's the whistleblower or not, which I hasten to say I do not know the identity of the whistleblower. And then third, I just want to make sure that I'm spending time in the field with our employees so that they recognize that I'm a leader who's approachable, including if they have concerns. Lastly, I accepted the chairman's invitation to come before the committee today because I thought it was important to communicate to employees that I hold myself responsible for these failings, and that they see me so do, and that they recognize that I consider their outreaches to me and their communications to me to be of vital importance. And so this is another opportunity for me to be able to communicate that.
Thank you, Secretary. I agree. It is important that you're here and that employees see that you're here and holding, and you feel accountable and responsible for the agency in such an important matter. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman yields back. And I think for the record, we should make very, very clear. The whistleblower and Vic that were involved in this, everything that has been done to make sure that we keep their names as low profile as possible at their request, and everything that has been done that what has been brought out has been approved by them specifically, so they know the importance of why it was that this needed to come to this level. That's why we had the executive session. That's why we've done everything we're supposed to do, and no one has been misled in any way, shape, or form. And I think it's interesting with a lot of the questions that come up that there's a statement like that, because everything has been above board. This is not political. It is strictly so that we can work to make sure that this never happens again. With that, Mr. Crane, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, might I respond?
Yes, you can respond, yes.
So I think the concern on our part has to do with the fact that the names of the accused were also made public in previous hearings, and it doesn't take much detective work to deduce who the other players are. in this whole circumstance. And so, confidentiality was compromised at the previous hearing. And so I've had concerns all along from my own statements at the business meeting that we considered the subpoena, that things that we should have waited for the OAW report, but that's where our concern is coming from.
The concern as far as the people accused, they were all invited to come. Well within our meetings rules and well within, because the thing is, this isn't a low-level area of the VA. This was high level. And we can sit here, and it amazes me, and trust me when I say it's not partisan. But folks, I don't care whether it's Democrat, I don't care if it's Republican. If at the higher level you have people that are sexually harassing and abusing the power to the level that this investigation found out, this is vitally important to have this hearing today. And I don't see where this is your side of the aisle or our side of the aisle. I don't. I don't at all. I see it as this is and must be dealt with so that a correction can occur in the agency to see this never happen again. And I respectfully say to you that we have handled this with the proper legal moves on everything that we did, and trying to make sure that the victims are not overexposed, that but the people who are the accused actually that it is made public what is going on so that we can cure the problem in the future. And I just think that quite often some things that have been said in the questioning are concerning to me. So, sure, I'll yield.
Thank you for that. I think, where I struggle with all of this is the way in which...
Order. I did yield. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
In the way in which these facts have been presented is inconsistent with what the OAWP's report says. So
they back it up completely.
It doesn't match up. Now, there's some...
They back up completely.
Wait. There is some consistency, but there is a lot of inconsistency to it. And I just feel as though we need to have all of the facts on the table. And that's where I'm struggling.
We have had all the facts on the table. We have.
Well, you've had the report perhaps for a long time. I've just...
Your staff got it like we did.
What,
yes.
Months ago? No. Yesterday? 2 weeks ago?
That's when we got the report.
Okay. So, regardless of timing here, it's still what is in that report and what has been somewhat presented or is inconsistent.
Yeah.
And that's where, I certainly felt misled from the first hearing that we had up until, and then receiving the report and getting, a fuller picture of what had happened.
Reclaim my time. It is, and we'll be able to talk to others on the next panel, okay? But we've been very consistent in the sharing of information between our staffs and between our members, and no one has been given false information. This is been taken very seriously by both staff, and I think that it's been very consistent on giving the proper information of the information we had at each given time. With that, Mr. Crane, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you showing up today, Mr. Secretary. I also appreciate you taking ownership and accountability for the failures. I've known you for a little bit, though you and I don't always see eye to eye on every single thing. You've taken the time to come out to my district, tour around, meet veterans in my district, and also look at the facilities that we're using to give them medical treatment. In no time, in knowing you for the brief time that I have, do I think that you're the type of man or the type of leader that would take allegations like this and just blow them off. You seem like the type of guy that would take these very serious. That being said, my big concern here is that your staff didn't feel it important enough to make sure that this very serious issue wasn't just put in a binder that you might or might not read, but was clearly communicated to you and discussed to get your guidance on how you wanted to proceed with it. Now, you've said here today that you've improved your internal processes to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Is that correct? Has anybody on your staff been reprimanded for this, or are you just taking ownership of it and making sure that the process changes?
Ownership of it and making sure that the process, now we're changing a whole bunch of things, and I'm happy to tick through those things, but for not seeing the chairman's letter when it was in my book, that's on me, not nobody else, that's on me.
Yep, thank you, sir. And obviously, that seems pretty just the way that this has unfolded seems, I'm sure, very disrespectful to the chairman, but also...
That's one of the things that really bothers me about it, and I saw no other way to address it than to just come clean in front of him about it.
Yes, sir. And it also seems disrespectful to, I think, those of us on this committee, regardless of what party we're a part of. I would hope, there's a little over 20 of us on this committee, sir, that if any one of us took the time and we felt there was an issue important enough to send you or your staff a letter, we would hope that that wouldn't just be put in a binder and that would be brought to you so that you could see it. Now,
You've got my commitment on that.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Mr. Landsman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here and your honesty and candor, integrity. The committee has done this investigation, and obviously we have to focus, as I know you're committed to, on what was found through this investigation. And do so in a way that ensures that the misconduct that was substantiated is prevented from happening again.
Yes.
And clearly, we all agree on that. So this may be redundant, and I think you've talked a little bit about some of this, but it's worth walking through again sort of the steps that you've taken or are going to take in that vein. So the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection mentioned in the report that some senior leaders within Human Resources Administration could have responded more quickly to the employee allegations, right? The time lag was a few days, I think, but it still hurt and affected employees negatively, and timeliness is hugely important. So how are you, just walk us through how you're engaging with the senior leaders across the VA to ensure that they know exactly what to do when confronted with these situations, and if they don't, where do they get the information, and then how are you holding folks accountable? Again, all in the vein of making sure that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I just want to say again that I really appreciate the steps that our Assistant Secretary for HR&A, Cassie Law, has taken from the moment she walked in the door to that job. She announced and is requiring each of us, including the Office of the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, to conduct a stand down on sexual harassment. That means that we take dedicated time and each component on refreshing our training and our understanding of sexual harassment. One can't read the report. Well, I'll come back to that question in a second. The second thing we are doing, again at the direction of our assistant secretaries, we are reviewing all of the training that we provide on sexual harassment. And we are ensuring that that training where it's lacking is updated. Third, it's quite remarkable to me to have learned, and I think I, in retrospect, maybe should have known this, that there are no anti-fraternization policies or reporting requirements at VA. That's a failing. We will update those fraternization policies. 4, we're hiring new personnel, as I've just talked about. 5, we are restructuring, again, consistent as we've talked with Mr. Levin and as Mr. Franklin and Mr. Van Orden have both underscored. We'll work with you on the same, on the restructuring. And then ultimately, we will take disciplinary action. And I think that disciplinary action is extraordinarily important. I'll just say one last thing. I think that the OAWP report is very helpful. Again, I want to avoid commenting about it too much for fear of undercutting its good work. But one can't read it and not be struck by the fact that we do need to refresh these questions about what's sexual harassment and what, for example, is acceptable behavior about sexting. And so I think that OAWP has done us a good service in making sure that those facts are all out there in a way that will force us to confront them.
Thank you. I appreciate your candor and the way in which you laid out those 6 items from the stand-down meetings and work, the reviewing of all training, the anti-fraternization policies, ensuring that you all have them, the new personnel, the restructuring, and obviously the discipline. I mean, very comprehensive, and I think that's going to be very helpful to the committee, so thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Luttrell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, good to see you, sir. How are you?
Good.
Pretty valuable note today from your statement and what you said today. I would create a folder in the front of your box that says VA Chairman on it.
I understand.
Just saying.
Yeah.
The VA is strengthening its policies, procedures, personnel training, and structures to improve the handling of sexual harassment allegations and help eliminate sexual harassment in the future. Okay, a lot to unpack here. There's 2 individuals that are involved in this hearing, and I actually have their performance appraisals, both of which, and these are in leadership positions, both of which their ratings are exceptional. I mean, they're 1 out of 5, they're both 5s. And the specific individual that I think oversees this was Ms. Grosso, correct?
Correct.
If Ms. Law is coming in to step up what is not effective and efficient, what does that look like? Because when I read the VA policy online, it seems, and I hate to use the word bulletproof, but I know your leadership style from the past year working with you, and I'm just curious, how does that work when you have leadership that is, in my opinion, was the direct result of the problem? So is it actually the policy that's not working correctly, or is it our inability to effectively weed out those individuals that are taking advantage of the subordinates?
Yeah, I think it's, the policy is the start but not the end. It's, necessary but insufficient. The execution of the policy and then the accountability to the policy is the lifeblood of a well-performing organization. And so I think that you're right, the policies are well drafted, but I think we have to refresh I think the idea behind the stand down that Assistant Secretary Law has directed is to make sure that we refresh those policies and then attach them in real life to real examples. And then we hold people to account for it. I will say that I've just signed off on the performance appraisals for 2023. And I did communicate back to the agency that I find that the ratings are inflated as a general matter, and that we have to.
That's troublesome.
Well, I think that over time, unfortunately, that there's just not a history of being 100% candid in the written evaluations.
Do the individuals themselves write their own evaluations and send them up to their superiors for signature, or does
In this particular instance, I can't know for sure. I know that does happen.
that does happen?
Yeah, but I don't. In this particular instance, I do not know for sure.
I caught something you said earlier, and I was trying to make heads or tails of it, but did you receive an email from the whistleblower on this complaint and that there was a tab that was not opened?
Correct. I don't know that. I received an email from an employee.
Okay.
Whether that employee is a whistleblower, I do not know.
Did it fall in this window?
It did.
Okay.
It did. And there is an attachment. Now, this is all refreshed.
Do you remember the day that hit?
It's I said earlier it's the 17th or the 18th, and I know this now only because I've seen the document.
October, November timeframe?
Sorry, October 17, 18. And again, now I may be corrected, and maybe I did open it. It, however, is my practice to not open attachments from emails.
The security, gotcha.
Yeah, from somebody that I'm not expecting an email from.
You said that you had a loss of confidence in Ms. Grosso.
Correct.
And you engaged with her on a specific day. What day did that fall on?
I can get you the exact date.
I think what I'm trying to get to is it in proximity to the whistleblower before or after? And if your loss of confidence was in any way in that time frame, I believe that should raise a red flag with you. Hey, if the leadership in this particular department, I have a loss of confidence, and I'm receiving information that's directly correlated to that department, maybe I should dig a little deeper.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I've tried to, in preparation for today, to go back to refresh my memory on the reception of that email, and I just can't. But I do recall the period around which in September I did lose confidence in the assistant secretary, and it was related to a range of issues, but these sets of issues, namely the allegations of ORMDI, did not factor into the decision at that time.
Yes, sir. I think just at that specific level, if things start to unwind, to me, it seems like the depth of which the iceberg floats could be catastrophic, which...
Gentleman's time is expired.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. McGarvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Secretary. One of OAWP's findings related to an improper personal relationship between a supervisor and subordinate. I want to be clear, it's an abuse of power when a supervisor engages or attempts to engage romantically with a subordinate employee. There is an inherent power dynamic at play.
I agree with that.
Both parties allegedly agree to any type of relationship.
I agree with that.
We need a process in place to guide these situations, to protect the balance of power, and to set clear rules for what's acceptable in the workplace. So, again, just to be clear, we need to root out harassment in all its forms, and having clear and stringent guidelines in place is absolutely critical to that mission. My understanding is that the VA does not have a policy in place to discourage this behavior to guide an employee who may engage in a relationship with another employee. The Office of Personnel Management also does not have a policy guiding agencies on this issue. Mr. Secretary, my question for you is the VA considering issuing any policies related to interpersonal relationships between employees, such as an anti-fraternization policy? If so, when can we expect that policy to go into effect?
Yeah, this is one of the findings of the OAWP report, and I am embarrassed to admit that I didn't realize that we didn't have anti-fraternization policies. I would have assumed that we did. I consider those basically very important policies. OAWP found that we do not have them, and we are developing them. I can't give you a specific timeline. I'm happy to report back to the committee. I don't have a specific timeline that I prepared for today, but I'll make sure that I communicate back to the chairman and the ranking member and to you on that question.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Self, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I want to explore leadership at the highest level. You testified to one of my colleagues across the aisle that this testimony was not for this committee, it's for your employees. I believe that's right. You took the time to let us know 4 times in 3.5 pages of your written testimony that you were not responsible because you didn't get you didn't read the chairman's letter. So I want to start with the soft landing, the gracious exit for the assistant secretary, a former 3-star general who was making at the time, between pension and your salary there, $350,000 odd. And you have told this committee that the truth is the most important thing here. So why did you not, and I've got a lot to cover here, so a short answer would be helpful. Why did you not hold her rather than accepting her resignation? Because she could have helped us find the truth. Now she's beyond sanction. So you allowed her to leave for some soft landing so that she would not help us find the truth.
I think I'll say 4 things. One, I testified earlier that my testimony here is important for the committee and for our employees. 1. 2, I communicated the sequence of events as clearly as I could, as you've pointed out, 3 times in 4 pages, so that I could make sure that the committee understood what informed my decision-making. 3, the question about this language soft landing, maybe I did use that language. I don't see that in the email that I have. I don't know that I ever used that word. It looks like the chairman's saying I didn't use that word. Not consistent with what I was trying to communicate. 4, I've relieved a lot of senior people in my jobs over the years. It's never been useful to embarrass them, ever. Nobody's confused about why she's not in the job.
Okay, then you were the White House Chief of Staff in 2014, is that correct?
Sir.
And it's not a matter of party because both presidents are of the same party. So you were the White House Chief of Staff. Your deputy, Rob Neighbors, published a report on the VHA scandal, said there were significant chronic system failures and a corrosive culture inside the VHA. Now, as the White House Chief of Staff, I'm sure that you were very aware of that scandal in 2014. So we move forward to 2023, and a lot of us that have served in the military understand the term loss of confidence. And loss of confidence also is often means that a commanding officer gets relieved. I have no doubt the fact that you're here speaking to your employees through this hearing that many of them are questioning your ability to lead. General Shinseki, at the time a retired Army 4-star, said this about that scandal then. He was the Secretary of VA in 2014. That breach of integrity is irresponsible, it is indefensible, and unacceptable to me. He said that he could not defend what happened because it was indefensible, but that he would take responsibility for it, and he would, and he resigned. What is the difference between you and Secretary Shinseki, given these 2 scandals? Are you saying that this scandal is not as important, it doesn't rate as highly as the scandal in 2014, because as the White House Chief of Staff, you would have been intimately familiar with a cabinet-level secretary resigning?
Yeah. The differences between me and General Secretary, Chief of Staff Shinseki are manifold. His courage, his service to the country, his integrity are all things that I could only aspire to. I would never compare myself to Rick Shinseki, who I consider a national hero. What is the difference between these two instances? I'm a sinner. There's no question that I've failed in this instance. And I'm learning from that failing, and we're taking concrete steps to address it. That's what I think is the difference of these stories.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Just for the record, you never used the term soft landing. Where the conversation is when actually Ms. Grasso in her email said gracious departure. That's where so you did not use that term, and she actually used a different word in that. With that, Representative Pius, you're recognized. Pius. Yes. Pappas.
You got it. Thank you,
Pius.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Pappas.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, thank you. I appreciate your candor today and your openness in addressing these allegations. Clearly, sexual harassment, no matter where it is or what form it takes, is completely unacceptable. And this is totally true about workplace sexual harassment, which we're facing here. So in a professional environment, every employee should feel secure and safe. And if they experience harassment, they should feel confident that there are internal processes available to address their situation, to hold others accountable, and to reestablish a safe and professional workplace. Last July, at this committee's markup of the Restore VA Accountability Act, I offered an amendment to the bill which would have required VA to provide additional training to supervisors to foster a healthier work environment at VA. Unfortunately, it was defeated. That training could have helped prevent the kind of inappropriate conduct the committee and OAWP uncovered at ORMDI. So in light of the issues this investigation uncovered, I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting H.R. 6531, the Train VA Employees Act. It's bipartisan legislation. I've introduced it with Representative Van Orden. It would strengthen supervisory training on performance management, prohibited personnel practices, and addressing reports of harassment and retaliation, among other things. Mr. Secretary, you talked a great deal about the stand down, about the refreshing of policies, about refining training, and I think those are all critically important. I don't know if you can shed any light on timelines for any of that, or if that's still in the development stage at this point.
I think I could, but I think I'd more obfuscate than I would be clear, and I think Assistant Secretary Lau, who's on the next panel, is in a position to spell out specific timelines. I'm sorry, I just don't have them at my fingertips, and I'm worried I'd give you the wrong answer.
Okay, well, we look forward to more information on that, and I think this is a vital thing that Congress can continue to look at in partnership with VA, so we appreciate your leadership there. Mr. Secretary, we're potentially facing another cliff here in March and the potential of a government shutdown. This is not new in this building. We've seen this story play out many times before, especially over the last year. I'm wondering if you can tell us what impacts are on VA and organizations like OAWP. What happens when we're facing the threat of a shutdown and we don't have regular appropriations?
Yeah, OAWP would stop functioning in the way it does now. There would be no intake or investigations. The assistant secretary and one staffer will remain to monitor veteran safety cases. And otherwise, it's roughly 150 FTE would be furloughed. I think it's worth reaching out to the IG on the same question, because we obviously really rely on the IG to be an aggressive set of eyes and ears for us on accountability and investigation, but I think he may have further information to enlighten this. At HRNA, the functions in HRNA that support VHA, the Health Administration, would remain because VHA has advanced appropriation. The other functions at HRNA would be furloughed.
Thank you for those comments. And since I brought up OAWP, you know that I have been a frequent critic of OAWP.
You were very much in my mind when I was answering the questions about OAWP.
And that goes back 5 years during my time on the O&I subcommittee. And I think your comments are appropriate, that it's a more effective organization and it has matured and come a long way. Clearly, there's more work to do. But I will note that the OAWP investigation began in September prior to the letter coming over from the committee to your office. And I'm wondering if you can offer any more comments on the findings of the investigation, or if you want to stay away from that. But I guess my question would be if you're confident in the findings of their investigation, and anything else you want to add about OAWP today versus where it was several years ago.
I'm confident that in the investigation, I think it's a good piece of work. I'll stop there. I did note that the referral was made to OAWP in mid-September. I think that's or mid-October, I believe. I think that's an important fact, but probably insufficient. Also important, they make some characterizations there about who a senior leader is. They have a jurisdiction on senior leaders. But importantly, an employee reached out to me. I can't remember the exact timing here, to say that they were concerned about not OAWP, but the AIB that was the Accountability and Investigative Board that was set up to look at this case, was still within the chain of command at HRNA. Out of that outreach, we made the decision to refer the entire thing to OAWP. I think that was an important decision. Lastly, this is an important tool that you gave us. This was in my prepared comments, and I went over them. I discarded them for purposes of time. But the OAWP is an important tool that you gave VA. But that tool hasn't always been used the way I think you all intended. I think now, after very good work by our former Assistant Secretary and now by our Acting Assistant Secretary, it is a more credible organization whose investigations are done in a more timely way and whose disciplinary actions as a result are more promptly imposed.
Thank you. I yield back.
Representative Rosendale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Secretary McDonough, thanks so much for being here today. And I've always known you to be transparent, forthright, and quite frankly, attentive to both your position and this committee. So I do appreciate you being in here today. I don't think anyone can deny that harassment took place at this point, but we do need to provide the oversight on the process to make sure that we can eliminate this conduct in the future and identify where the breakdown was and this lack of communications so that it didn't get to you earlier, so that we could start working on it. And I think that's what
Mr. Luttrell.
Representative Luttrell, several we're getting at. So my questions are going to try to identify that breakdown. Do you know when Deputy Secretary Bradshaw first was made aware of the allegations against ORMDI?
I don't.
And is there any way that we can get that information? Are there any documents to support that?
The chairman made some comments in at the end of his opening remarks about wanting to talk to other employees. I think we've had a back and forth on that. But we'll keep digging on all the document requests, and you'll make your own conclusions about that, and we'll make sure that we're, as we work out the arrangements, we'll have our people up here.
And the same with Chief of Staff Kimberly Jackson. Again, when was she first made aware of the allegations or information about this?
Fair question.
So we don't have.
I don't have that, but okay. I'll make sure that we get it.
Okay. You testified that during September I'd come to the decision that we need a change in leadership at HRNA OSP and had begun planning for Ms. Grosso's departure. And we had a lot of conversations about the harassment, but then I just heard you speaking with Mr. Luttrell. So what I'm trying to do is nail down what specifically led you to make this decision, because in your words, the cause to lose your confidence, but then you told Mr. Luttrell that it wasn't in relationship to to these particular charges or allegations. So my question is, what specifically then did lead you to lose confidence?
Yeah, if you'll remember that in September, we were dealing with an issue around critical skills incentives. That was an issue that we've talked at length with the committee about. That was among the issues I was concerned about.
Okay. What did you mean when you said that, Ms. Grasso, over email, you have my commitment to be very disciplined in how I talk about this and how other senior leaders talk about your service at the VA?
What I mean by that is I felt and still feel that it's never helpful to embarrass a senior leader, a public employee. In this instance, particularly one who had served the country over 30, like so many of you, over many decades, honorably. And so that's what I meant when I said that to her.
And as long as, again, this is the case, and we're not just relocating people, because you and I have had that conversation as well, that to basically give them another location to possibly, potentially perpetuate the same kind of a problem that has already existed, that's never good as well. My understanding is that...
And she was a political appointee, so that, you know, she was served at the pleasure.
So she emailed you on October 29, 30 regarding her resignation, apologized for not performing up to standard. What was she referring to in her email, not performing up to standard?
I don't know. I'd have to ask her, but you know, as I said, I communicated that I had lost confidence.
Okay, what is the process for reviewing a program? This is going to get into the fiscal end of things now, and its effectiveness before you request a budget increase.
Well, one of the things that we've stood up at VA is, I was actually struck when I arrived that there's relatively few places to have kind of enterprise-wide looks at programmatic review. Each of the independent administrations makes individual determinations, but we stood up something called the IRC, and I'm not going to remember what it's called now. It's maybe the Internal Resources Council. This is one of our sub policy-making groups, and we are doing regular reviews of resource outlays there, resource investments. Those inform deliberation at the next three higher levels: the Integrated Policy Council, which is a policy-making level body across VA. That then informs any deliberation at the Deputy Secretary level, which is the VA Oversight, VA Operations Board.
I'm out of time, so I'm going to cut real quick. So are they the ones developing some kind of matrix so that you can actually measure the effectiveness of either a program or an agency?
Every program has programmatic goals and then key performance indicators, KPIs. Those are run in some instances by the program themselves. Those are, then double checked by things like the IRC, and then ultimately by congressional oversight, by the IG, and by other performance mechanisms.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. And Mr. Secretary, just real quick, I just want to mention that in my opening statement, I've said your lawyers have a list of individuals we're requesting to interview as part of the committee's investigation. And I just want to know, can we get a commitment by next week? We can kind of get an answer on those individuals, on whether we can have access to them.
Yeah, I think it's useful to have this conversation in this setting. So just to give you an example, among the things we'd like to work out is one of the persons on the list is our general counsel. A transcribed interview of a general counsel is a very rare issue, especially as it relates to the fact that that person provides privileged legal counsel to me and to others. And so I don't see any problem on timing. I just want I need your assurance that we can set this up and work out the modalities of this.
Yeah.
Consistent with how this is
Everything we
handled.
want to do, we want to be legal and above board.
Yeah, and I also just want to make sure that, it's pursuant to a set of rules that we all agree to. That's
Fine.
all. And so, you've got my commitment on that. Okay. And let me just restate the commitment that I think you've had since the day of that conversation in November, which is we want to get to the bottom of this. And we are cooperating. We will continue cooperating. We take this very seriously.
Thank you. I want to thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I know this has been a long day.
I got real work to do now.
Yeah, the witness is excused, and the second panel, we're going to call them up, but we do thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary.
I didn't mean that. This is real work. I didn't mean that.
I know that.
I did not mean to be pejorative. Thank you.
You're great. No problem. All right, if we can call the meeting back to order. So on our second panel, we have Ms. Cassandra Law, the Assistant Secretary for Human Resources and Administration, Operations, Security, and Preparedness. And we also have Mr. Bruce Gipe, the Acting Secretary, Assistant Secretary for Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection. Will the witnesses please rise and stand and raise their right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Well, thank you for letting the record reflect that the witnesses have now answered in the affirmative. Ms. Law, you are recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Chairman Bost, Ranking Member Takano, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today and for your longstanding support of veterans and their families. Testifying with me today is Bruce Gipe, the Acting Assistant Secretary for the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection, the office that led the comprehensive internal investigation into the allegations of wrongdoing at the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity and Inclusion, ORMDI. My father, grandfather, and great-great-grandfather were all veterans. My father was also a physician who served as an academic and clinical leader over his 33 years of service to VA. He instilled in me a reverence for our nation's veterans and the importance of VA's mission. 35 years ago, I was fortunate to secure a job working at the best mission in federal government, serving veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors at VA. My first job was helping veterans improve their health and well-being through recreation therapy at VA Palo Alto. I spent years providing direct care to veterans before serving in numerous other roles throughout VA, Today, I'm honored to be working as VA's Assistant Secretary for Human Resources and Administration, Operations, Security, and Preparedness. Ensuring a harassment-free environment is a personal issue for me. Harassing or discriminatory conduct leads to a waste of human potential, is inconsistent with the core values of VA, and hinders our ability to accomplish our mission. I'm squarely focused on these issues, and I won't tolerate sexual harassment or assault on my watch. On my first day, I sent a memorandum to the Acting General Counsel directing an immediate review of all harassment prevention training materials. I want to be certain that we are both effective in training our employees on how to identify and eliminate sexual harassment and assault. A task force has been set up to review our current training, which will report back to me in early March. I directed all VA undersecretaries and assistant secretaries to complete a workplace harassment stand-down. Each office was directed to develop a plan of action to be implemented by April 30th to ensure that all employees fully understand and adhere to VA's zero tolerance policy. I also sent an email to all of our more than 400,000 teammates with a clear message. I'm here to support each of them and to make certain that VA is a safe, welcoming, discrimination-free, and harassment-free environment. We're here today because we fell short of this goal at the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity, and Inclusion. As set forth in the 125-page report that Assistant Secretary Geip can describe in more detail, VA's internal investigation found multiple instances of sexual harassment and other misconduct within ORMDI. The report also found failures by senior leaders within the Human Resources Organization in addressing allegations of misconduct at ORMDI when they arose. Consistent with the recommendations in the OAWP report, VA is taking a number of steps to prevent sexual harassment in the future. First, about disciplining the employees involved in misconduct at ORMDI, I have some very recent news. While I can't go into much detail in a public session, I can share that just yesterday, VA issued a notice of proposed removal to one employee, and I've been informed there are additional disciplinary and recoupment recommendations from OAWP's report that VA will act on by the end of the month and hopefully sooner. A number of policy and structural changes are also now underway. VA is in the process of creating an anti-fraternization policy addressing romantic or sexual relationships in the workplace. I expect this policy will require the disclosure of any such relationships and prohibit inappropriate supervisor-subordinate relationships. As highlighted by the OAWP report, the current ORMDI reporting structure is not in accordance with recent laws passed by Congress. However, as the report also noted, these laws impose conflicting obligations on VA. The department is working hard to determine the best way to modify ORMDI's reporting structure in light of the conflicting statutory mandates. I hope to come back to you in the very near future with our proposed path forward. VA is also working to fill the position of a permanent Deputy Assistant Secretary of ORMDI. Additionally, I'm exploring bringing in a consultant who can further assist me in the important work of restructuring and retraining ORMDI. I'm focused on improving training and will bring outside expertise to provide EEO and anti-harassment training to all ORMDI employees in particular. Lastly, I'm committed to truly changing the culture and eliminating sexual harassment and sexual assault at VA. I'll make sure that VA does whatever it needs to do to rebuild VA employees' trust in ORMDI and create a safe, welcoming, harassment-free environment for veterans and our incredible workforce. Chairman Bost, Ranking Member Takano, and members of the committee here today, thank you for allowing VA the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony, and we'll move forward with questions, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Assistant Secretary Law, when were you first told that you were expected to testify in this hearing?
I was told about 2 weeks ago.
Were you appointed to this position specifically for the hearing?
No, sir.
So now that the OAWP has completed their investigation and made recommendations, can you explain to the American people, this committee, step by step what happens next and how long you think those steps will take?
Could I clarify one point, sir? The steps that I am taking with the report?
That's correct.
Yes, sir, absolutely. So as in my oral testimony, I had said the first two actions were to get our general counsel to do a complete review of our training related to sexual harassment, sexual assault, and what we call bystanders training. They will be back to me in mid-March. I asked not only for a review of the curriculum, but also suggestions on improvements that we need to make. Secondly, I referred to the national stand down, so that is enterprise-wide, and asked for reports to come to me, plans of action within 30 days, which I'm on about day 19, so mid-next week, to confirm that there are plans in place with milestones, and then to have those actions completed by the end of April of this year. So those, and then the hiring of a deputy assistant secretary for the ORMDI is being finalized right now. I have taken some time to rework the expectations. I wanted to be a little bit more clear before I put that out for recruitment. That will go out very soon. I'll be happy to give the committee an update once it is live. Of note, it will be all of government-wide. This will not be just a VA exploration for candidate. We're opening up government-wide to try to get the best and brightest. Thank you, sir.
So on the recommendations of the report, as far as discipline and things like that, what do you see going to happen there?
Yes, sir. The first action of the proposed removal, which I just referenced, that occurred yesterday. There are processes once that first action is taken, and so that will need to play out. I do not have a specific timeline on the other actions that are outlined in the OAWP report. And again, I would be very happy to come back and update the committee as we have those to implement.
So who decides who the proposing and deciding individuals are for implementing this? Who makes the final recommendation and call?
The VA Chief of Staff will be the final decision.
So how long do you think it'll take for VA to decide whether or not to follow whichever recommendations they follow?
I don't have that information today, but as soon as I do, I will get it right to you.
Okay, because the next question would be nil and void, except for the fact I was just going to say, are you happy with you do believe it's going to move fairly quickly or not?
Yes, sir, I do. The level of seriousness that this series of events and today's hearing, the OAWP report and the recommendations are being taken incredibly serious, and we are moving forward with due diligence and prioritizing. So
We
yes, sir,
thank you from this committee that you're moving forward and that we're trying to straighten this problem out.
Yes,
so
sir.
with that, I will yield to the ranking member for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Law, I thank you for stepping into this role during this moment. Something that struck me about the ORMDI is that the majority of employees involved involved in this incident were teleworking, and they were all geographically dispersed. Some employees had not been face-to-face in person for a very long time, maybe even years. In the case of the employees involved here, they were not in person in the same office, were they?
No, sir.
And in a conventional work setting where people are in person in the office, I can imagine a number of ways that misconduct could occur. I don't want to belittle or assert that misconduct can't happen virtually, but I am interested in hearing more about how this behavior emerges when employees are teleworking full-time and how it can be quickly dealt with.
Thank you for that question, sir. It's a really important issue, and it's one that I am looking into in the revisions of our policies. You know, when we look at our workforce today and consider a post-pandemic versus pre-pandemic environment, we have a lot of telework, we have a lot of remote positions, and in addition to that, as is in the case with ORMDI, we have geographically differently located offices. So there are regional offices that are located in different parts of the country, and then a core office that is located in DC. And having that really raises for me the importance of clarifying in policy how, you know, we hear of cyber bullying and we hear of different forms of interactions that are not explicitly spelled out in our directives and in our guidance of what you can and can't do, of what is right and what is wrong. And so really taking, I think this highlights that.
So you see needed to update
Yes, sir.
policies. I just want to move on to Mr. Geip. So Mr. Geip, my colleagues are very clearly focused on the timeline of when the allegations of wrongdoing were brought to the attention of VA and when those allegations were acted upon. When did OAWP initiate its investigation into these allegations of wrongdoing? And did the chairman's September 29th letter to VA prompt OAP's investigation?
Thank you for that question, Ranking Member Takano. So we first received our first complaint on September 24th, and I believe Chairman Boss's first letter was on September 29th, so a few days later. They were close in time, but we received ours a little bit sooner.
So did the OAWP's investigation begin before or after Chairman Boss's letter was arrived?
It began before, and when we get a complaint in, usually within 3 to 5 days, we've made an initial kind of cut on it to decide if it's within our jurisdiction and if it's going to go for an investigation or if it's a monitored referral.
I see that. So, but for what I'm trying to clarify is that OAWP was responding
Yes.
To the complaint, and it was not the chairman's letter that initiated the OAWP investigation.
That is correct.
And is it customary for OAWP, when it begins an investigation, to inform someone as high as the secretary that they're investigating?
No, usually we'll let the manager of the person who's accused of wrongdoing, let them know.
Okay, so the immediate supervisor, thereabouts. So there would have been no reason why the secretary would have known that this was even occurring.
We would not have informed the secretary.
So the allegations against Mr. Richardson arose from conduct that occurred in 2021 and 2022. Can you explain what caused the delay in those allegations being investigated and handled?
Yes, so I don't believe that an actual complaint was filed until October 10th in that case, 2023. So what had happened was there was some inappropriate behavior which we found in that situation. Another subordinate manager kind of took steps to deal with that. We also found that subordinate manager didn't take enough steps, and we kind of made a finding there. But the first time it was actually a filing was October 10th of 2023. There had been another EEO case that was involved with an applicant back then in the 2022 timeframe. So that had kind of taken, the action was around that, and I think that the actual inappropriate relationship or inappropriate actions by that person had been stopped by that point, and it really was about this EEO suit after that. But then there was a filing on October 10th, which we looked into.
So the delay, just to clarify, the delay in handling the investigating and handling was due to Mr. Richardson's immediate supervisor not taking action.
Correct. There were steps that should have been taken. There were two things I'd say. First of all, one of the supervisors was supposed to do a fact-finding, didn't do it. Did, however, say, no contact. That's why I think that was pretty successful.
Was that no contact ever documented?
I'd have to review the record. It might have been verbal, but when there was a contact, went back and said no contact.
And again, this immediate supervisor is an expert in EOC policies and should have known that a verbal directive to have no contact is insufficient.
Correct. But then the second part of that is that person's next level supervisor, who's another person that we made a recommendation against, he actually said, don't take it any further up the line. He said, I'm going to handle this. Kind of the buck stops with me, and he did not trust the next level supervisor, he said in a rather crass way, to deal with it.
So in fact, actually, supervisors above that level, at the level of Ms. Grosso, were not informed about what was going on at this level.
That's what our investigation showed.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Siscomani.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Law, thank you for being here and to answer some of our questions. To both of you, actually, thank you for being here. I do want to direct my questions to you, Ms. Law, if you could answer them for me. I think we can all agree that the way that the agency handled this misconduct was a major misstep. The secretary before you right now acknowledged that mistakes were made and highlighted a lot of the areas where the VA himself and his leadership team are addressing the issues that happened there. And I understand that you weren't there when all this happened. Obviously, you weren't responsible for this. But I do want to just, if the answer to my questions would be something else, then I wasn't there when that happened. That would appreciate that, just to try to answer them in the best way possible, because they're going to be more on the general sense of what you saw when you came in. So that's basically my first question. When I'm looking at your testimony today, I want to know your honest take on what the situation was like when you got involved. What you would have done differently, and what specific measures are being taken to not only improve the VA sexual harassment policy, but also ensure this never happens again. And the never happening again is something that I just did a question to the secretary as well, which is the main objective here, to make sure that doesn't happen again. So what did you see when you walked in, and what would you have done differently had you been in that position?
Well, I'd like to start by saying I'm in complete agreement, and that's exactly what I want to. I acknowledge that things were not done well. They were not done timely. As I said in my opening, I am reviewing all of the policies right now to get an understanding of what specifically is included in our policy, what the expectations are for our supervisors, how the chain of command loops back to follow up on actions, as well as employees understanding their rights. I think some of those issues are not clear. So I don't have a complete answer for you now as I move forward and complete this review of the policies. Your questions and the tone of your questions, I believe, the intent of your questions are what will drive my actions.
Okay, I'll do one quick follow-up here. When we talk about the policies and the expectations of the leadership, like you mentioned, in my mind, the policies are one thing. From what I'm reading here, people acted violating policy in some ways. In other ways, there was a policy that now could be added and safeguard some of these actions. But at the end of the day, it was the people that decided to violate these policies. We can have all these policies in place, but if the people aren't acting right and the expectation is not there for the leadership, then really it won't make a difference there. And when I look at things like what happened here with Mr. Johnson continually awarding Mr. Davis the highest overall job performance rating in every single category, while both were allegedly sexually harassing employees, that's troubling to me when you have people that are applying the policies that are the perpetrators, allegedly, of what was happening there. So we could have all the right policy, But I want to, if you can dive into your point there of holding the leadership accountable and making sure that the team, the employees at every level understand their rights, that at whatever level they're in, they have the opportunity and the right to express if something is being done to them that shouldn't be. And so again, policy is one thing, but talk to me about the expectation from the leadership in spite of the policy being there, because obviously in this case, that didn't work.
Thank you. I would answer that with three thoughts. I think three things that I saw as missing or lacking, and is something that these qualities are very important to me personally, so I believe it's what I will bring to HRAOSP, which is that acronym for the very long name for my office that ORMD falls under, and that is communication. I think communication needs to be more transparent and more frequent and more expected as a part of daily operations. And then the second and third are culture and trust. I think we have seen a degradation of culture and trust throughout that office. It is a large office. There is a lot of important work that they oversee and do, and we have shown without question that a lot of very poor, bad, and disrespectful conduct has occurred, and so it is going to take some absolute intentional rebuilding of trust, and you all will see that as it unfolds as I lean into my tenure in this role, and I look forward to continuing to update you on how we're doing.
Well, I appreciate that, and I look forward to seeing how this unfolds and how we can solve these issues for them to never happen again. Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Representative Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Law. Thank you for being here. I had mentioned earlier in the hearing talking about the Women's Veterans Task Force and some of the work that we did there. And a lot of the work was the foundation for the Deborah Sampson bill that was passed that had to do with a lot of different things around women veterans, but one, importantly, was around sexual harassment and determining that there were policies or lack of policies thereof within the VA with regards to that. I just wanted to make a point that what we are talking about today in this case is really about employee to employee, but we have to keep eyes wide open with veteran upon veteran in a VA medical center, perhaps, also employee to veteran in a particular setting too. So I just want to raise that issue because it became clear through some of the conversations I've had with women veterans across the country that these types of harassment, veteran on veteran or employee to veteran, are occurring as well. So I just wanted to make that point. I also wanted to ask, I know that I misspoke earlier about the OAWP report just coming out. I understand it's the redacted report that has come out so that everyone who's interested can actually read the report and come to their own conclusions. And I know the importance of this hearing is really to move forward and ahead and to address the issues that this report has brought about. But I just want to make this point, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but part of the report was around the rumor mill and vicious rumors and people talking about each other and making accusations about women sleeping with their boss, et cetera, et cetera. This committee has named names and made public various accusations. And I think from my vantage point is the OAWP report disputes some of those allegations in that they interviewed all of these women and all of these women said, no, that is not what was happening. And so I just want to know if you agree with me on that or disagree. Again, I don't want to put anybody on the spot and I don't want to pursue a big argument here on the dais, but I would just like your opinion.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd like to first begin by backing up one step and thanking you for your leadership and work on the Women Veteran Task Force. I'm familiar with that report, and that collaborative effort brought a lot of good information forward, so thank you very much. That was very meaningful. I am in agreement, and I would also like to allow my colleague, Acting Assistant Secretary Guy, to respond as well.
Thank you.
What I would say is, I think it is unfortunate that there were a lot of things that we looked at that were based solely on rumor and innuendo. There's a part in our report where we talk about the lack of appropriately addressing harassment concerns led to a growth in a hostile and toxic work environment and led to a dysfunctional office with rampant gossiping and innuendo, leading to even more harassment complaints. So obviously some of the things we found wrongdoing, and we called it out and we made hard calls on those. Some of them, did they happen? Did they not happen? All I can tell you is that the evidence was not there for us to find them. There were rumors, there were innuendos, and it's unfortunate that that doesn't lead to a healthy culture and happy workforce. So I'd hate for anybody who was the subject of one of those rumors to feel like they had been kind of painted with that brush when it was not true, because that's not what we found.
So you're just saying that you did not have the evidence to back up some of those allegations or accusations?
I will tell you that when we wrote the report, we tried to be very, very careful. In some places, we would say we found insufficient evidence to support this finding. In some places, we literally said we found no evidence to support this, because all we would have was the most blatant rumor that was just based on a total speculation, and the reasons were not solid at all. So you'll find throughout the report, especially in the unsubstantiated parts, where we say there was no evidence at all.
Thank you for that, and I know I've run out of time. I guess I'm not going to be allowed to make my last statement, so I will yield back.
Okay. You want time to yield? I'll yield you the time to make your last statement. Make it.
Well, I was just going to say, I
We've been kinda
know
open
that
on
I
time
have
here
no
today.
more time, but I am still interested, and I'd like to follow up with you to get some understanding. In the report, you describe some of what we have been calling sexual harassment on the dais, inappropriate conduct of a sexual nature, and I would like to understand the difference at some point in time.
I'm happy to address that or to come visit with you. And
It's up to you, Mr. Chair.
okay, in very short. Okay, so sexual harassment is a very specific legal concept in Title VII in the EEO world. OAWP, our jurisdiction is whistleblower retaliation and senior leader misconduct. We were also reassigned misconduct by non-senior leaders in this situation. So we were careful because EEO suits are still going on, and we didn't want to make a finding of sexual harassment because A, it's not what we do, and B, there are legal things going on, legal lawsuits going on. So we were careful to couch our findings in our jurisdictional language, which is misconduct. We just noted kind of colloquially that it was misconduct of a sexual nature. I hope that helps.
Representative Berkman, General Berkman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In looking at both of your bios, I'm not going to use any military examples unless you want me to, because it's not fair to use a comparison if you all haven't lived it. You're both successful. You've for lack of a better term, been through the ranks and moved up in positions of responsibility. But in the VA, just out of curiosity, is the word command climate ever come up? And if I was to say command climate, could you say, well, it's corporate climate, it's institutional climate, but I don't want to use a term that anybody wonders what I'm talking about. So if I say command climate, basically, it all starts at the top.
Yes, from the top.
from the top down, and you're responsible at your level and below you to lead, be the example, all of that. And because we use climate surveys in different ways. What's the cultural climate? What's the employee satisfaction climate? All of these kinds of things. Well, this is about command and leadership and taking responsibility, for your actions, but the actions of those under your command. So having said that, I just like a commitment from both of you that if you get yourself in a situation that is just, let's just say, unfamiliar or uncomfortable, that you won't hesitate to ask for help. If you don't have the answer, and nobody that you will proactively seek guidance from above.
You absolutely have my commitment, and I feel as though I have been given the ability to do so within the department, within our structure, with the secretary and the deputy secretary and the chief of staff. So yes, absolutely, I will.
And you also have my commitment.
Yep. Because what we're talking about here is an issue of within a command, if you will, within the structure of the Veterans Administration. But in the end, if you all and everybody in the Veterans Administration are not doing the job to the best of your ability, in the end, that's going to trickle down in some way, shape, or form to outcomes for the veterans and their families. And I'm guessing there's been a lot of, I'm sure, tense words and phrases and interactions used over the last couple of hours. If anyone under your command is not focused on the better outcomes for the veterans and their families, then you already have a command climate issue, and that has to be dealt with sooner rather than later. And in our office, we use a phrase at the end of every meeting: bad news doesn't get better with time. As soon as you see something, say something, so we can keep a brush fire from becoming a forest fire. And that's exactly, we are where we are today because of behavior, but actions not taken at a leadership role. We can't go back and rewrite that script as happened, but I'm counting on all of you, just like my colleagues are here, to stand up for the right reason and ultimately for the veterans when it comes to telling your own organization, by the way, your behavior is substandard and either you get a remedial period or you're gone. With that, I yield back.
Representative Blujo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Mr. Gipe, I'd like to come back to you and an issue around process of investigations and the like. I'll start with, please explain, how does OAWP ensure due process, fairness, accuracy in investigations you conduct?
So it really starts from the first time somebody files with us. One of the first things we do is make sure that we have their consent, like to what extent we can use their name, so that we make sure we're protecting whistleblowers. Then once we find out we have jurisdiction, we've trained. I mean, if you look back at 2019 at the IG's report, we put training in place. We've made our investigations consistent with the SIGI standards so that we know that there's no bias in our investigations. We put policies and procedures in place. So that's how we do it. And then we've also added a layer of attorneys who review our work and make sure that we are legally consistent.
If someone wants to have their confidentiality protected,
yes,
you can still pursue the investigation, right?
Yes, except, so almost always the answer is yes. There are situations where if we have to keep, somebody might choose to stay anonymous. There are situations where that might keep us from like taking the next steps we need to take. But that's all in our, like when somebody goes on and signs, that information is all there. And we also have a whistleblower navigator to help people in that situation navigate the situation and figure out how we can best help them.
Explain to me, please, the process for developing disciplinary recommendations and then who enforces those recommendations.
Sure. So we do our investigation, and at the end of the investigation, we decide in-house. It's the final disciplinary recommendation is my call, but the executive director for investigations, the director of investigations, and our chief attorney, we get together and we have a debate about what we think the right level is. VA, I don't believe, has a table of penalties, but we look at case law, we look at similar cases within VA, and then we come up with what we think that the best recommendation would be. And then when that's issued, it goes to usually the supervisor of the person who we're looking at. They have, under statute, they have 60 days to propose or decide a decision. And if action is not taken within 60 days, then we are required to report back to Congress that action has not been taken.
And so bringing it back to the allegations we've been discussing in today's hearing,
right?
OAWP did recommend discipline.
We did recommend discipline.
And so you just answered my next question, 60 days for relevant officials to take action there, and otherwise you'd have to come back to us in Congress.
Right, 60 days isn't how long I think it would take. 60 days is just when we would have to come back to you and tell you if something didn't happen.
Understood. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Rosendale, you're recognized.
Thank you much, Mr. Chair. And thank the witnesses for being here to address this obviously very bad situation. The Office of Resolution Management, Diversity and Inclusion at the VA is responsible for preventing sexual harassment and promoting diversity and inclusion within the VA. It's deeply troubling that the office tasked with preventing sexual harassment is instead facilitating harassment and wasting resources on harmful DEI initiatives. We heard Representative Siscomani talking about quotes from the investigation wouldn't take place until they could find someone who was aligned both culturally and in their gender to even begin the investigation. In their fiscal year 2024 budget request, the VA requested an increase of 360 full-time equivalent staff for the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity, and Inclusion. The House passed Military Construction, Veteran Affairs, and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill did not grant this increase. Unfortunately, the Senate version did provide this increase in funds. Only in the United States Senate would it be seen as a wise idea to increase funding to an office that has a major sexual harassment problem. I believe the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity, and Inclusion needs to be abolished. Their few legitimate HR functions can be transferred to another office within the VA. The additional money should go towards programs within the VA that actually help the veterans. So, Ms. Long, I understand that you were appointed to your current position just last month, and you've basically been thrown right straight into the fire. However, your predecessor left the office in a very bad position, and you will need to work diligently in the coming months to begin to turn things around. Given that you failed to do something as basic as submitting your testimony on time, unfortunately, you haven't inspired much confidence to this point. You testified that one of your top priorities is to ensure a safe, welcoming, and harassment-free environment for veterans and employees at the VA, and everybody on this committee agrees with that goal. Do you think complying with EEOC guidance is important to achieve your stated goal?
Yes, sir, I do.
In an interview with OAWP, Jeffrey Mayo acknowledged that the ORMDI is not compliant with EEOC guidance, but stated that so are many other federal agencies. We're bad, but so is everybody else. I didn't appreciate this dismissive attitude of the EEOC guidance. Does this comment by Mr. Mayo inspire confidence in your subordinate?
Well, I don't know the full context of that discussion or dialogue. What I would say and what I would like to add is that the funding that you referred to, the additional staff, I think it was 380 FTE, or
FTE.
full-time equivalent, is part of the department's efforts to come into compliance with the Cleveland-Dole Act. It has to do with realigning EEO. So we have begun the realignment of the program managers, but there are about between 380 and 400 that still remain in VHA.
Ms. Law, that's fine, okay? That's fine.
Right.
So 380 extra FTE, if we're not supervising the ones that are currently there, if the ones that are currently there are participating in sexual harassment to this extent, exactly what is 380 individuals, additional individuals there, how is that going to resolve that problem?
Well, they're different problems, so it
They
is not-
are different problems.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So please, while we're talking about this problem, let's not have the discussion about, I'm trying to determine how do we resolve this problem, okay? How much in taxpayer dollars has the organization paid out due to EEOC sanction fees in the past decade?
I don't have that figure with me.
Did you have it in the last 5 years?
I would be happy to come back to the committee with
Okay,
that.
I would like to see that broken down in the last 10 years, and then I would like to see it broken down on a year-by-year basis over that 10-year period too, so we can see what the trend line looks like, if it's getting worse, if it's getting better. The OAWP report pointed out that Hari Johnson's handling of the allegations against Archie Davis was particularly egregious. Most notably, Johnson rated Davis exceptional in every category, resulting in the highest possible rating. As the current procedures are obviously not working, what tangible steps are you taking to better train leaders at the VA to spot misconduct by supervisors?
Well, we're taking a couple of actions. I referenced the work that I'm doing to look at our policies right now because I want to strengthen them. I want the expectations, roles, and responsibilities to be more clear. More specifically to the scenario that you just gave with the performance. You heard the Secretary in his testimony also note he has gone back to all of the senior leaders saying, you know, we need to be tighter, we need to be more disciplined, we need to more critically look at our assessment of our employees across the enterprise. So I will fold that into this new work as well. I think it's important, and you're right, when you look back and you see the activities and the actions that this report has uncovered and that the whistleblowers brought forward, yeah, there's no excuse for that. And I can't say why an employee would have a 5 on their performance evaluation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize the next member here shortly, but Mr. Guy, for the record, because I think there's been two different statements made. Based on your finding in the report, do you believe that ORMDI had a toxic culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look, I think there's a quote I can read you, which is, this failure of ORMDI senior leadership allowed the growth of a hostile, toxic work environment and led to a dysfunctional office filled with rampant gossiping and innuendo, leading to more harassment complaints.
Okay. And I would put another quote in there that's also in there, and the mountain of evidence and testimony revealed an office replete with misconduct, including misconduct by organizational leaders, which spawned an environment where inappropriate conduct was rampant. That's also in there. So as we go in with the testimony, I felt like we were getting two different answers on what your findings were, and I just wanted to clear that up for the record. So, Representative Ramirez.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, as we're here in the second panel and thinking through where we are in this moment, we know that as members of the committee, we have the responsibility to ensure that the VA holds itself to the highest standards of accountability and transparency, and that you have the means to carry out due process. So I have a couple questions here. Ms. Law, We have heard many comments about the responsibilities that senior leaders within ORMDI had in responding to these sexual harassment claims. What responsibility do first and second line managers have in addressing claims of harassment that are brought to them?
Thank you. Well, in terms of harassment, there is a duty and obligation to take action, to acknowledge the complaint within 2 days. And then within, let me just clarify my notes here. Excuse me. Within 5 days to begin to address any incident. That includes any incident of inappropriate or harassing behavior. And you may have heard that reference to where that could be separating the parties, establishing a no contact order. So that needs to occur within 5 days, and then within 30 days to have the investigation be completed. That is 30 days from the receipt of the harassment complaint. And that's according to the VA directive, which is 5979, the Harassment Prevention Program. That is also one of the directives that I'm looking at as part of the review of all of the directives and guidance that we have in the department, to make sure that we are as clear as possible and perhaps go a step further so that there is no question as to what actions are necessary.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Law. I want to make sure I pronounce that correctly. Gipe? Oh, see, I was going to say Gippy. I'm really glad you corrected me. I'm a stickler, as the chairman knows, for good correction in spelling and pronunciation of names. So in this case, you found that there were failures to report of this middle level of management as well. What led you to make the conclusion that they failed?
So the one particular situation that we called out was where the person acknowledged that there was a responsibility to start a fact-finding. The person's manager told them and expected that they were starting a fact-finding, but they said that they were not going to start a fact-finding. So one reason we called that situation out is because it was intentional. It wasn't like, oh, I took 5 or 6 days and it should have been 3. You know, it was intentional. So that's the one we called out.
So what were some of the recommendations that you provided to the VA regarding these managers?
So we recommended one manager who was very high level be removed, one who had already retired. We recommended clawing back bonuses, yearly performance-based awards, and also annotating a SF-50, the document you get when you leave, to show that the person had retired while under investigation and that the investigation substantiated the conduct that was being investigated. So 2 suspensions, and then as Assistant Secretary Law, we mentioned we recommend some very specific changes to the structure of ORMDI, the 5979, which we think leaves holes and in some places left managers not clear exactly what to do.
Okay. Well, thank you. No, that's helpful. You gave me some concrete specifics, which I appreciate. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. McCarvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Law. From our staff's review of the materials provided to the committee, there seems to be some frustration among ORMD staff around processes like travel authorizations, travel reimbursements, and training opportunities. When mistakes are made in carrying out these processes, or when there's too wide of a latitude for managers to subjectively decide approval, employees, I think, could understandably see a delayed reimbursement or non-approval for training as a form of retaliation. It sounds like the lack of understanding of procedures and the lack of consistent adherence to procedures has really hurt employee morale within ORMD. Ms. Law, how do you plan to work with ORMD leadership to ensure that employees understand the appropriate procedures for requesting travel, submitting reimbursements, and securing funding for training so they can identify when non-adherence by supervisors may occur?
Thank you for that. I think this is one of those cases, to reference the Secretary's testimony where earlier, that it begins with the policy, but it doesn't end with the policy. So when you look at travel for federal civilian employees, the statutory language is very clear. What we're supposed to do, the guidelines, how you approve, what is acceptable. So while we're still going to look at our policies that govern that, the how-to, it's equally important is how it's communicated and how often and how frequent. Earlier I was mentioning that I think that when you talk about culture and you talk about trust and you talk about changing the environment, it's my belief, over my career, which is just over 35 years now, all with VA, I have found that the more you engage directly with people and you're genuine and you present the facts as the way they are and you have repeated, continued dialogue, it's easier for those regulations and policy and statutes to sink in and to make sense. And if they don't, you ask questions and you work it out. So that's my approach, sir.
Okay. But the problems still exist. And, even with what you just said, does the VA actually have any plans to try and identify the subjective judgments of supervisors or even the appearance of these arbitrary decisions? Because if the statutes are clear, there is still a problem.
Well, again, I am reviewing what we have in our system now for how we communicate what those responsibilities are. So I provide additional updates as we move forward. I'd be happy to be very transparent with the committee in what I'm trying to do and how I'm implementing change.
Thank you.
It is an important topic.
Yeah, and I actually thought it was an easy question.
And there are also layers of approval, so that plays into that as well.
Yeah, and like I said, that wasn't meant to be a trick question at all, and so we definitely would like an answer. Also, in the course of this investigation, it's come to the committee's attention that there may be issues with how ORMD employees are required to file their own EEO complaints of discrimination. There seems to be opacity and inherent issues with the process of filing with the U.S. Postal Service, and we know that the ORMD employees deserve the same ease of access to the EEO process as their VA peers. Ms. Law, have you all conducted a review of this process, and if not, do you plan to?
That is part of my assessment of the environment, so absolutely. We do have an interagency agreement with the U.S. Postal Service that can look at the ORMDI-related harassment and EEO complaints. And I want to look not only at I would like to look at the interagency agreement itself to make sure that the statement of work really outlines what we want and what we need from them and the level of specificity and clarity, and then also to, of course, support it. As part of the OAWP non-disciplinary recommendations, I am also conducting a review of the last 2 years of all complaints that went over, so that we can do an assessment of what went over and were they properly addressed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Budzinski, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Law, and thank you, Mr. Gipe, for being here today to discuss these important matters with the committee. Appreciate your time. Ms. Law, I was glad to hear that you recently initiated guidance instructing leaders across the VA enterprise to conduct stand-downs on sexual harassment. Can I ask what guidance will be included in these trainings, and will it include further instruction on how and when to conduct fact-finding requirements for reporting disclosures made to supervisors, and or how to file complaints internally and externally within the VA?
Thank you. The stand-down itself will not necessarily address the specifics of how to implement directive and how to follow the guidelines. That will be more in line with my review of the policies and the directives and guidelines to make sure. I think your point is a great one, that there is not full clarity there. So, we want to make sure that everyone understands how and when and the timing to do so. And the second part, I'm sorry, the second part of your question.
I was just asking about reporting, requirements for reporting disclosures made to supervisors and or how to file complaints internally or externally with the VA.
Oh, yes. So that was the more in the line of handbooks. And the first question that you asked about the stand downs, those action plans are due to me next week. So I'll be doing a review. We very intentionally gave some leeway rather than one standard format of here's a training and please take it. We did develop a playbook that had a lot of options that people could consider to increase the dialogue and communication around this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and will you share information regarding these stand downs with the committee as soon as the materials, it sounds like, are being prepared?
I would be happy to.
Okay, that'd be great. And I have a question for Mr. Geip. As many members have spoken today, OAWP seems to have demonstrated serious improvements since its stand-up in 2017. How many days is the average investigation within OAWP?
Thank you for that question. It's one I'm very happy to answer. So 2 years ago, our average investigations were taking about 250 days. For last fiscal year, the average case took 82 days, which, usually if we have recommendations, those are gonna be ones that take longer and ones that we shut down earlier take shorter, but it was an average of 82 days. And more importantly, since the beginning of fiscal year 2023, in all but one case that we've made a recommendation, there's been some action, some disciplinary action by management in every single case, save one. So our reports aren't only coming out faster, but they're being implemented, and they're making a real impact directly on veterans and on veteran patient care and safety.
Okay. And what steps has OAWP taken to decrease the time complainants wait for a complete investigation while still maintaining thorough and efficient review standards?
It's been really comprehensive. We have, like I mentioned earlier, we put in place SIGI standards, we put in policies and procedures, we've done some hiring, we have an attorney division in place, and we've done more active management of case processing. We've also, because of our procedures, we've made sure that we're not duplicating work that happens in another forum. So we're moving cases forward. We're getting rid of those cases that might be at OSC or in some other forum. And we're putting our firepower on the important cases and taking care of them.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And that concludes our questioning. Does the Ms. Brzezinski have any closing remarks for the ranking member? Okay, hearing none. First off, I want to thank both the majority and minority staff for the hard work that they've done in this. I want to let you know that I'm continuing to be concerned about the Biden and VA giving what we heard today. The investigation is far from over. And under the leadership, this committee will find the truth, no matter how long it takes. Senior VA leaders, including the Secretary, we were glad to have him here, have previously told us that they have all the necessary legal authority to quickly and appropriately discipline the employees. This is despite the fact that the Biden administration is no longer using the streamlined disciplinary authorities granted under the 217 VA Accountability Act, championed by former President Trump. Based on this case, they should probably start. This is why I will continue to push forward with our efforts to restore the provisions in the VA Accountability Act through my bill, H.R. 4278. The bill was favorably reported out of the committee on a party line vote, and I will continue to advocate for the passage of this important bill. Bad people have no business serving our veterans, period. Now, I ask unanimous consent that all members shall have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extenuous material. Hearing no objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned.